Right, that's enough of that starting music. Welcome to the show, everyone. What episode are we on? Episode 59, Friday 17th of June 2022. Tony in the chat right there. Good evening, everyone. Good evening to everyone listening, whether you're listening live or whether you're listening to this show back whenever. Welcome to the show. Welcome, everyone. Say hello in the chat. Esha, you're with us this week. Say hello.
Esha?
Esha?
Yes.
Say
What's
hello.
up?
Say hello.
Hello. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Sorry, I had the microphone a bit off accidentally.
It's okay.
Sorry about that.
Well, hello. Tom, say hello.
Hello, I'm gonna rob Sammy of his ability to gloat and say yes. Apologies for the late
right.
start. That's
Well, it's
actually on me. I refuse to let Sammy have the
Oh,
joy
what do you
of
mean,
being
Tom?
the one to
No,
moan.
wait, Tom. You're 2 minutes.
No,
early.
too
What
late,
are
too late. You've it's been stolen from you.
You too.
You can now introduce
honestly.
yourself without kicking off.
Honestly.
No, hang on a minute. No, Tom is actually early this time. He's 2 minutes early on his second delay.
Friendship, eh?
What would you do without it?
Right, Sammy, say hello and don't roast Tom. Challenge.
Hello,
Impossible.
everyone. Well, Tom actually woke up this time, which is a miracle.
Come on, get a new story, Sammy. Change the record.
Okay, Tom, a British person, is complaining about the rain in the Far East. He's complaining about the rain. It's like it's depressing weather. That's coming from a British person.
No, it's not
What else are you
depressing.
gonna do,
It's like
Sammy?
it's like mad uncomfortable because it varies between being like 35 degrees and boiling hot, and then like 5 minutes later it's like
35
a
degrees
tropical
C.
storm.
Degrees
Yeah.
Celsius for our American listeners.
So very
know.
hot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very hot.
And
I mean, it's hot here too at the minute in Europe, right? It's boiling. I guess it's not
I think
tropical. That's the difference.
Just global warming, isn't it?
Joining us this week, we've got another Tom, right? And what do you want to be called for the show?
Yeah, Coco is fine. Yeah,
Coco.
so yeah, Coco is more than fine.
All right, cool. Well,
Now this Tom is actually early.
I was.
early.
Tom be like
Before you, Sammy.
please.
Turned up before you.
Yeah, that's
But-
impressive, isn't it?
Yeah, there you go. It's our thing, isn't it? It would be different. It would be different if it wasn't like this. People in the chat was like, someone in the chat said, it wouldn't be a Mango cast if somebody wasn't late. There you go.
You see, I'm just keeping tradition alive.
Exactly. Right, we're interrupting Cooker's introduction to say hello.
Yeah, hi. It's great to be on. Finally, I've been trying to organise this with Fran for a little while.
Yeah.
But various things have popped up, so I finally made it on tonight. So it'll be good.
So you were late in actuality.
Yeah. I'm about a month late if you view it by that. Yeah.
There you go, Tom. Other Tom, don't try and beat that. Don't be like a month late.
Yeah.
Right, so you're going to talk a little bit about the Assange case with us, right?
Yes, yeah. I'm a lawyer with academic interests in sort of the British Constitution, obviously focusing on things like human rights and obviously the big news
Quick
in that
question.
regard. Yeah,
How do
go ahead.
so you guys don't have a constitution, yet how do you... I don't understand being a constitutional monarchy without having a constitution.
Yeah, I can
Written.
explain that. I actually used to lecture British constitutional law. The way it works is that
the most interesting of topics.
the most thing of topics. I'll keep it brief. Essentially, the way our constitution works is it's called an uncodified constitution, and what that means is rather than it being in one big central document like most countries, our constitution is found in various things. You know, like acts of parliament, Magna Carta, even books. A lot of it is wrapped up in the parliamentary process called convention.
It's the British way, right? Because
literally.
Judges aren't
if you do that,
actually
right?
making it up.
Well, no. If you do that and you spread it out like that, that's the British way. Be sneaky. Keep it like you can't. It's harder to change, isn't it? Everything. If it's all kept in books, like you just said. Then
pretty much, yeah. You can actually, you can actually draw a timeline of the British Constitution using sort of significant acts such as Magna Carta, the Bill of Rights, the Laws in Wales Acts, the Act of Union, all stuff like that. It sort of basically forms the foundation of the British.
The Americans have to keep theirs all in one like document under 1,000 words, so they can't keep track of it. Yeah, that's already a lot of reading for them.
Got to be on one sheet of A4.
The American Constitution is written by like people who wanted to keep their slaves.
Isn't every capitalist country's constitution?
No.
Like
Especially the American Constitution. So
it was the founding reason of America. Like we must have slaves, and also we want to genocide the Indians more.
Exactly, that's written in the Declaration of Independence. But whatever. And so it's basically what you realize is that the entire country fulfills its original purpose of protecting those with property from their property, I guess. And the other Tom is also an expert on modern slavery.
Yeah, so I did my master's dissertation on modern slavery, so I focused specifically on through a legal lens, the sort of responses or lack thereof in legislation to modern slavery and the reluctance to actually combat it.
What's a brief example of? Hold on. What's a brief example of modern slavery compared to? What's the difference for anybody who doesn't know?
So a lot of current modern slavery takes the form of people trafficking, human trafficking, sex trafficking.
Yeah.
And basically, if you look at the majority of Western modern slavery acts, Britain being the first country in the world to pass a modern slavery act, they focused on supply chains. So rather than doing anything substantial, essentially they put this responsibility on countries earning, I think it's over 30 million, to ensure that their supply chains are free of modern slavery. But that doesn't actually address most of the root causes. Hold
on. I've got a question as well, Esha. So, Cook, finish up. We'll do your question, Esha, then mine. Go on.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say I did a big focus on my dissertation, and that's what my research was on, specifically how prisoners are treated, and how in every sort of slavery definition there are exceptions for forced labour, and specifically in America they utilize ex-plantation sites to force this labour. There's also exactly. There's also evidence of just like detained refugees being forced to work in order to be fed. And obviously there's the really famous case of them actually making weapons of war cheaply, forcing prisoners to make weapons of war cheaply, otherwise they won't get fed and be forced to
What weapons were they making specifically?
It was it was armor and missile parts,
I
think for the Iraq invasion.
Oh my god, okay. I was just going to ask you about that, and apparently it's $11 billion worth of slavery.
Yeah, it's huge, and the big issue is obviously at the moment in the United Kingdom, they're trying to sort of use that as a sort of way to change our human rights laws, and in particular, they're actually now talking about repealing the Modern Slavery Act to make it
Right.
easier to support refugees, send them to Rwanda.
Right, so this is, hold on, because this ties into my
What?
question. Hold on, this ties into my question. So you mentioned that like the first country to create this Modern Slavery Act was the British, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's a very strange concept, isn't it?
Yeah,
Why would the
so
British? So why would the British? So my questions are: why would the British, in the first place, create this? It sounds to me like they're doing it to stifle competition and make sure they don't get undercut by slavery again. And also, why would they now leave it in this day and age?
So it was actually done under Theresa May when she was Home Secretary. They had come under a number of sort of fire from various pressure groups, as has pretty much every Western nation across the world, to have a Modern Slavery Act. And essentially, Britain just happened. Theresa May wanted to sort of have
It's
a
a
shield.
recent thing. So
Yeah,
very recent. Okay.
It's recent. It's sort of the last 20 years that it's been discussed, and I'm not too sure why. And where the definition falls between traditional slavery and modern slavery.
Yeah.
And essentially, there was a number of UN conventions on it, and a bunch of nations sort of started then looking into it. So we finally passed ours in 2015 under Theresa May as Home Secretary.
When Cameron was leader.
Yeah, when Cameron was leader, yeah.
Right.
It was my theory, sort of speculative, is it was a shield against austerity. They
Right.
can't be called cruel and unusual if they pass a Modern Slavery Act.
Yeah. It
Um,
makes sense,
then-
doesn't it? It's a virtue
Yeah.
point, whatever,
Exactly.
isn't it?
Yeah, and then if you look, and then Australia was the next country to pass it in 2017. Basically copied the British Modern Slavery Act.
I mean, it's definitely a hand washing act, isn't it?
Yeah,
It
pretty
also
much.
occurs to me that like over the past 7 to 10 years, there were quite a lot of cases of actual modern slavery in the UK. I mean, obviously, there's probably still some going on right now.
Yeah.
Probably quite a few going on right now. But I remember some specific cases. Like there was one case of a Polish or a Czech man who'd been like kept as a literal slave in someone's
Yeah.
house, and like he was like forced to live in a cupboard, like Harry Potter style.
Yeah.
And I think there was like quite a few big news where the like breaking
also-
cases.
But you raise a good point with that example, because that's like an individual, isn't it? So it's the British state can legislate against stuff like that, because that's against like one individual, and it's not hurt their economic, because it's we're living in an age, aren't we, where liberalism is about the British were masters at ditching their colonies with quote unquote clean hands, right? Because they would burn all the documents and create this propaganda of how, we've just shook hands with the natives and we've agreed to leave on, they are the masters of creating that. So it's almost like, for me, that they're free to virtue signal stuff like, I mean, Australia, what Australia is a country that's built on like forced labour, right?
Yeah.
So for them to then turn around and do this is the ultimate in being able to go, yeah, but look, we're against slavery now, right? And that's the classic liberal trick, isn't it? Because if a liberal can go, slavery was bad in 1600s, but I'm against it now, whilst being like an out and out NATO shill, imperialist, whatever, they can do that because they can say whatever they want against 1600 slavery because they're not physically living in it, right? Regardless of
And they
whether,
don't address.
well, this is what I mean. Regardless of whether they come from like a long line of slavers or they're one of these modern companies that, if you just look back at them 100 and 200 years ago, were involved in slavery themselves and now are like virtue in that they're anti-slavery or pro Black Lives Matter or whatever, when only 200 years ago they were founded on taking black people from Africa and enslaving them, right? So,
But not even that. Not even just like the fact that was
The
the
worst one
foundation.
I
but like,
have
hold
to
on,
say
Esha.
about this example.
Hold on, Esha.
Sorry.
Let Tom speak
but
first.
but that it's never been truly addressed. Like they did it. Like we don't even we don't even discuss the fact that these states were built upon slavery. The USA, the Australia,
The
I
UK,
think, it's,
even though slavery didn't happen in the UK, like
the trade,
openly.
obviously built
the
the economy.
country is built
Plus,
upon it.
but what I'm getting at is like, like terms like reparations and stuff like that. These countries have never even paid reparations on behalf of the egregious crimes that they committed. Like,
Yeah.
but then they can say like, oh, but look, we're the first country to ban modern slavery. So look how good we are. And it as you say, it just kind of virtue signals, doesn't it? And
Whilst
it also
turning
kind of
Libya
takes
into
the
a
heat off
slave
them.
market.
I don't like how you speak of slavery in the past tense in the U.S. because, like I said, the 13th Amendment has an exception where it says that you can enslave people as punishment for a crime.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at who they imprison on what purpose, the U.S. should not be speaking of slavery in the past tense.
Well, like
Yeah,
Coco
so
said, Angola,
on that
right?
point, that exception regards to prisoners is the one thing that's common across all slavery and forced labor legislation. So if you go all the way back to the International Labour Organization, which I think was early 1900s, when they wrote their rules, they had the exception of prison labor. If you even look in the European Convention on Human Rights, which is obviously a hot topic at the moment in the UK, it contains the same exception. Although they advocated previously for votes for prisoners, so the court wants to give prisoners the right to vote, they will also uphold the right to force prisoners to conduct labour. So you can see the real sort of double standard. And then just on the point that
That's
Fran and Tom were
liberalism.
talking about obviously, the sort of the financial nature of it, it's worth remembering that the modern slavery bill only actually applies to companies with a turnover of more than 30 million. So
Right.
these people, these companies are usually already wealthy enough to weed out modern slavery or just pay the fine, which is one of my biggest criticisms. It's not actually effective. Obviously, the actual crime of slavery is still a crime in the UK. You can't just force someone to enslave, be a slave or whatever. But the actual aim of the Modern Slavery Act was to quote unquote clean up supply chains. But it's only if you earn 29 million a year, you're under no obligation to check your supply chains for evidence of modern slavery.
That's
just like
that's
Nestle.
hilariously dark. Insofar as they don't give a fuck. But there was what.
Hold on, Esha. Esha, hold on. Tom, carry on.
I was going to say, just finish this point dead quickly. There was the recent Xinjiang forced labor bill, which the USA has brought in, was talking about how important it is to ensure that every product that is produced in Xinjiang province has been rigorously checked for evidence of forced labor, and it has to pass these 4 to 6 checks or something, these 6 balances in order to be considered for import into the USA. And on the same day that they passed this, a report was brought out that stated that the US slave labor market in the USA, for the prisoners, is worth 13 billion, I think. The amount of labor that they steal from prisoners is the equivalent of 13 billion pounds. $13 billion. If you take into account the minimum wage that they're not being paid, essentially. So it's hilarious to watch the double standards. It's not even double standards, because obviously this idea of forced labor in Xinjiang is, well, it's questionable whether it's even occurring anyway. Obviously, our prevailing opinion is that it's mostly propaganda. I'm sure obviously there's some cases of people in prison in Xinjiang making stuff, but the fact that is something that the USA would criticize whilst having one of the largest slave prison labor businesses in the world is quite darkly comedic.
Being more direct about this, check out the tweet I put in. Basically, USA was the #1 producer for raw cotton in the world, and until they started to make this same kind of cotton in Xinjiang, and suddenly they were saying that it's genocide and slavery. So in fact, the US is upset that their demand for cotton has gone down, and of course prisoners do still harvest cotton, which is slaves. So I made a whole thread about that last year. Just put that up on with the first tweet where you'll look at that on the screen.
It's a very good point you bring there, Esha, but it's quite funny how China's responded to this kind of act by the USA, and how they've basically combated this specific act is that all clothes made in China now have to have at least 5% Xinjiang cotton in their constituent materials. So essentially, if the USA wants to buy any clothes from China, they have to buy Xinjiang cotton, or they have to refuse to buy it. So it's basically the USA like being forced to either sanction its entire clothing imports from China, which are presumably quite large, or refuse to buy clothes from China and then have an economic crisis. And you've also got other kind of things that are built in Xinjiang, I believe, like solar panels and stuff like that. Essentially, all of the companies in China that use products from Xinjiang now have been... All the companies in China that can use Xinjiang products are basically required to use products from Xinjiang as a way to fuck the USA over now, which is quite funny. It's called the Xinjiang Patriotic Trade Bill or something like that in China, and it's really clever because they force the use of materials from Xinjiang in almost all the supply chains to basically foil the US's attempts to.
I mean, that works both ways, because the DPRK have been sticking made in China labels on clothes made in the DPRK for years to get around sanctions as well. It's like the easy way, isn't it? Just stick a label on it that says something.
But I mean, when I was doing my research, obviously you had to sort of touch upon the allegations being made. And it's kind of funny that I remember, Fran, when we were talking back last year when that massive BBC report came out.
The one specifically about cotton, right?
Yeah, it was meant to show damning evidence of, this forced cotton picking labour, and at most, the bedrock of their evidence was the fact that some military vehicles were used to transport workers. And that was what their assumption was based upon.
The pictures on the article were stock photos that you could buy.
Yeah.
They just bought stock photos of Xinjiang cotton pickers.
And essentially, when I looked into like actual cases of modern slavery in China, essentially it was just the same as any other country. You've got criminal gangs who unfortunately operate in like the strong industrial zones. I think it was in Guangdong, one of like the real like belt and braces sort of industrial areas. So it's literally no different to the UK, no different to the United States, and just with
probably
these other
working
countries.
together, like the gangs work together on the same
100%.
global industry.
100%. The one I was reading is that they tend to cross from Vietnam across a specific boat crossing, and go over. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. My Mandarin is not very good, but there's one really strong industrial city and just lock them in.
Probably Kunming.
Might have, I can't remember what it was off the top of my head.
That's like where essentially the hotbed of Chinese crime is in Yunnan province, because it's directly on it's in the Golden Triangle, so it's in the cross section of all of the Southeast Asian states. It's the one Chinese province that links China to Vietnam, China to Malaysia, Laos? No, not Laos. Anyway, there's a couple of like state borders with Yunnan province, and as a result, because it's also heavily jungled, so it's very difficult to maintain the border, right? So you get a lot of criminal activity in Yunnan province. It's where a lot of China's drugs come through. Illegal drug trade comes through. There's a lot of cases of people being kidnapped, taken to Vietnam by gangs. But the thing is, like, the Chinese government is very...
They don't have it written into the constitution like the US does, right?
Not even that, but like they're very brutal when it comes to crackdowns. Like the triads, who are kind of like the most well-known Chinese gang of all time, don't exist on the mainland anymore because they were basically destroyed in the 1990s. There was a Dajan campaign, a crackdown hard campaign, which basically eradicated organized crime on the mainland, which is why you don't hear about gun crime in China anymore, because there was a concerted effort by the party in the early 90s to basically destroy organized crime. But obviously, a country the size of China, well, any country is going to have some vestiges of organized crime, no matter how well you crack down upon it. Now
how
they
can
only
you
really
stop
persist in places
that's the point, right? How can you stop something that you don't know about, right? Crime's always going to go on behind a closed door until that door's opened. So, but the difference is that, like, that's not a reflection of the state, is it? Like, you can't use it as one when you know full well that, like, the state fights against that stuff, especially when you're the thing that the West always does. When liberals will always like beat these third world countries with a stick over things like that, right? But then they're the ones doing it themselves on a state level. But they will always accuse you of, like, whataboutism or whatever if you try and bring that up. But
what about it?
They're doing that.
Invented by the CIA.
Yeah, exactly. But they're doing that in the first place by beating these third world countries with the same stick that they should be beating themselves with, right? That's the point that I'm trying to make. They're going, look over there, whilst doing it themselves.
I think one of the most important things, like, just circling back to human rights, obviously in modern slavery, especially in European nations, they tend to view human rights with a very strict Western European lens.
Like, if
you take the
lens.
Yeah, if you take the ECHR, I was speaking to you about earlier, which obviously, for those who don't know, ECHR is the European Convention on Human Rights. It was written after World War II with the alleged aim of basically stopping another Holocaust or another massive world war.
Was West Germany involved in this?
So I can't remember who the initial members were. Basically, it was written.
If West Germany was involved, they had more Nazis in their government than Hitler.
Yeah, so it was basically written by the British. It was written by British lawyers immediately after World War One. It wasn't ratified until about 1951, and it contains sort of the basic sort of rights that most Western Europeans think about. You know, freedom of expression.
I've just got to stop you for 1 second. Just consider for a second that we live in a world where the fucking East India Company, quote unquote, the British, have written the Convention on Human Rights.
Yeah.
And modern slavery acts. The British, the people who are best at genocide and slavery and considering and deciding who's human or not, right? That's the British were good at that. That's their thing. And then they write the human rights Convention.
But they're sneaky with it because they don't make it effective.
Of course they're sneaky with it.
The ECHR famously was not effective in the United Kingdom until 1997, 1998.
Okay, when was it written? 70s, right?
It was ratified in 1951.
Oh, okay.
Until then, it held nothing but
West Germany ratify it?
Yeah.
That was when we ratified it. Yeah.
I've got the list. I've got the list up here. So West Germany actually ratified it in 1950. And then proceeded to. Signed it in 1950. Ratified it in 1952, and then put it into force in 1953.
Hold on, Escher. Before you come in, Escher, this is like the guide on not cheating being written by like a serial cheater. That's the equivalent of. Carry on.
I was just gonna promote in my episode from yesterday. We released yesterday this episode about West Germany, where they were definitely not promoting human rights. So it's about where this they had a project where they decided to put orphans in the care of pedophiles. Listen to that episode at historically.substack.com.
What?
Yes, listen, exactly.
Did they have another program where they put heroin in the hands of heroin addicts?
An actual what the hell, man?
Putting children in the hands of paedophiles is like putting the European Court of Human Rights in the hands of Nazi Germany. Oh shit, yeah, that's what they did.
Mad.
That's more or less what they did, and this is literally.
What is this world?
Yeah, can you share this link out sometime? I don't know how. I'm gonna send the link. Share this out to the chat.
Yeah. I'll post it after
But
the show.
yeah, somewhere. I don't know how to do this. I'm putting it in our chat. You feel free to. Yeah,
Just drop
I just
it.
had to.
I'll share it out afterwards. Don't worry.
Okay, you know, but yeah, so you can see how well their human rights worked. But yeah,
Carry on,
that was
Coco.
yesterday.
There's a case I'm trying to find that I can't remember the name of. That was basically just the proof of just how ineffective the ECHR is.
Go on. Can you give us the
I was
rundown?
trying to get out later because I can't remember. It was something to do. Essentially, from what I can remember, it was something to do with the SAS operating on foreign soil and blowing up
What
kids in Greece.
operating?
The British Special Forces operating on foreign soil, and a breach of the human rights by basically they bombed, like blew up a car or assassinated someone. I can't remember the specifics, but I'll try and dig it out for us.
Right. And what was,
The
and were they were saying what? Who did the human rights breach?
So essentially, it was just a breach of the right to private. I can't remember what it was. This is why I need to find the case. But essentially, what until the Human Rights Act came along, you could not enforce your human rights in a British court unless you were suing a public body.
Right.
So that's basically how it worked. It was sued for something really, really confusing called horizontal indirect effect. Basically, so if you were suing like a hospital, you could sue them, but if you were suing a private contractor in a hospital, you'd have to bring your case against the hospital for something like breach of employment. At which time, a court, which was a public body, if you were to mention your human rights abuse, would then stop the hearing and allow you to bring the case against the private person, who would then recognise your breach. You couldn't bring it directly against the individual for breaching, or a private body, like a company like McDonald's, for breaching your human rights. Just weren't allowed to do it.
Right.
And it wasn't until it was brought into the UK courts with the Human Rights Act of '98 that you're finally allowed to do that, which means that for the majority of its existence, the ECHR was nothing but a sort of slight nudge to the government of the Council of Europe, say, maybe you should consider respecting human rights, and that's all it is. And if tomorrow the government decided to repeal the Human Rights Act, that they can do that.
Which is what's like very much on the discussion table at the moment,
Yes.
right? With regards to all of this Irish border issue.
Yeah, which is what's funny because, as I was saying to Fran earlier, obviously Russia did join the European Convention. They were kicked out at the start of obviously the Ukrainian situation, and there was a Tory MP
Kicked out by the British, right?
I can't remember who it would be. Whoever was cheering at the time. I think it was just a unanimous vote. They kicked them out. But basically, this Tory MP was yeah, find out for me. Was kicking off recently by saying that a Russian judge could rule on our laws up until like 4 months ago. How is that fair? And you're like, mate, you're talking about leaving the ECHR. Russia hasn't left the ECHR. So what does that say about you if you're kicking off about that on one side and you're calling Russia these evil monsters when you're the one who wants to leave the Human Rights Act that you're so desperately want to promote? It just doesn't make sense.
I've got a legal question, which is it's a bit separate from this kind of this human rights discussion, but you just piqued my interest when we're discussing Russia. So obviously,
this normally.
No, it's
He's a lawyer.
It's an academic question. It's academic. It's not like I've got a labour dispute. No. Essentially, I presume recently you've heard about the case of the Donetsk and Lugansk, the Donetsk People's Republic sentencing those two British mercenaries to death.
Yeah.
Right. So, with regards to their status as non-official combatants because they were mercenaries, how does this stand up with regards to giving them criminal charges, regardless of whether that's the death penalty or life imprisonment or whatever? Because as I understand it, they've been charged with terrorism offences against the people of Donetsk by the Donetsk People's Republic. Now, also, obviously, Britain doesn't recognise the Donetsk People's Republic as an official state. So, what's the legal situation with that? Because it seems very murky insofar as, like, Liz Truss has come out and said that essentially it's illegal, but obviously Liz Truss is an idiot who doesn't understand anything about nothing. So I refuse to take what she says as
Can I answer
fact.
first?
Anyone can answer.
Okay, first
I
of
just want to know
all-
what the legal situation is.
Okay, so if Britain does not recognize it as a country and it recognizes it as a part of Ukraine, well, it's like, I guess Ukraine sentenced 2 people to death, and there's nothing Britain can do about it. And if they are sovereign countries, again, that's the definition of sovereignty. Don't go break laws in other people's countries.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
so,
That's
not
the
a thing
short
that Britain
answer,
can do
right?
about it.
Not
So-
Actually, there was a British person who was like in China who said something like, "They won't shoot me because I'm British" or something like that. And
So
I
the
think
answer
that
is,
was. Sorry.
the answer is it's kind of murky because obviously you have the Geneva Convention, right?
they're not part of the Geneva Conventions because
Exactly.
they're mercenaries.
Well, exactly. But also, Donetsk also isn't part of the Geneva Convention.
Yes.
And if you think about obviously the statute of the ICC, the International Criminal Court, they've ruled that mercenaries aren't entitled to the status of prisoners of war, and the detaining power can essentially treat them according to whatever status they hold. So they can be prosecuted for being a mercenary under their own national law, if the national law contains those provisions. Obviously, with Donetsk, it's going to be a sort of ad hoc basis because they won't have, I guess, an official statute, but maybe, yeah. Does anyone know?
They have a very, very official statute.
They do
What
have
they
one,
did,
do they?
they took basically they created just pulled up all the Soviet statutes and made it
Okay.
come back into effect. So
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, so essentially they're not really entitled to the status of combatants, prisoners of war, anything like that, or they're also not considered a protected person. You know, there's case law on this, there's rulings on this going all the way back to about 2005. So essentially they would just be treated as criminals. Now obviously whether the death penalty is obviously a separate sort of philosophical question. But in terms of it being quote unquote illegal, I don't think so. You know, it's only illegal in the extent of whether or not you view Donetsk to be an illegal state.
Yeah, yeah,
Right,
exactly.
So it all hinges on that, really, the relevancy of the legality. Sorry, not relevancy. The legality of the states of Donetsk and Lugansk.
Yeah.
So I suppose under the Russian constitution, because Russia has recognized these as sovereign states. Same with Syria, I believe, or they're about to
Cuba.
recognize them.
Cuba
Yeah,
recognized them.
yeah.
they're
So like,
Venezuela
procedure.
Okay, so they have like 5 or 6 of people who, but it doesn't matter because effectively they've been de facto in charge of that area.
oh yeah, they've had de facto independence for 8 years, but I mean in terms of their actual secession from the state of Ukraine and their formulation as independent states, that's a relatively recent thing. But
Yeah, but the point is...
wouldn't Britain have to recognise them in order to actually discuss the legal
no.
status of their
No, they
prisoners?
Not really.
No, I mean,
because-
insofar as if they wanted to talk with the representatives of the Donetsk People's Republic,
Not
right?
really,
and
but
wanted to
they could
negotiate-
demand that.
With anyone they want, like-
Not like... There's no rule that says they have to recognise them first, but if I was the DPR, I would be like, okay, I want international recognition before we even sit down and talk. That would be my first demand. That's what I would do. To answer your question as well, there's not really anything Britain can do because, you know, they've done a crime in a foreign country. That is just like international law, isn't it? Like what applies in one country necessarily doesn't apply in another, right? So how can Britain, aside from launching a full-scale invasion to free the guy, what can they do? They can't, unless they want to like sit down and talk, which is obviously going to result in Donetsk going, well, recognise us then, right? recognise. So
Yeah.
almost like the DPRK does when it's dealing with the US, you know.
But that was the kind of
The US
parallel I was
recognizes
trying
the
to kind of.
DPRK as a country.
But that was the kind of parallel I was trying to join, because obviously the USA's recognition of the DPRK and its validity has always been kind of like a bit questionable up
The
until
US always recognized it.
No, I know, but insofar as they still consider like the puppet regime in the south of Korea to be the true government of Korea, in the same way that like
So yeah,
you know, they always question the legitimacy. Whereas like Trump legitimized the existence of the DPRK when he actually went and had talks with them, right? When he went and had the nuclear discussions with Kim Jong-un. Whereas like it seems to me like Britain would have to do the same if they wanted to sit down with Denis Pushilin of Donetsk and sit down and say like, right, well, we want our mercenaries back, kind of thing. I don't know.
Yeah, I would agree.
Is that Britain? Why would Britain? If I were Britain, I would so totally sacrifice two mercenaries.
Well, they're going to, aren't they? They're going to do
Yeah,
that.
they
But
don't
the DPRK is going to give them a heavy sentence, right? To try and
The DPR,
Not
not
the
the
DPR, sorry.
DPRK.
DPR is going to give them that sentence. Sorry, it's because I was just looking up the DPRK. Donetsk is gonna hand them a heavy sentence, almost to try and bring Britain to the table. It's you know, they're being used. The sentence is the heaviest of heavy, isn't it? In order to try and bring Britain to the table. They could sit on death row for like 20 years, but
Sure.
Yeah, I was going to say
But
that, you
if
know.
you've seen all the videos I've seen of all the crimes that have been committed by these battalions against the people.
well, yeah, I'm not excusing
God.
their crime, but I'm saying their sentence has obviously been given to the full degree. Not just because of that, but because
I agree.
it's opportunistic during the
Yeah.
But because the
But they
conflict
deserve
is
it.
ongoing. Yeah, I'm not saying they don't deserve it, but it's as advantageous, isn't it? Anybody's going to do that because it's advantageous when you're in that position to go, okay, you've cried about the. I mean, it's Britain that's made them so high profile, isn't it? The British media could have just not reported about them, and nobody would know about them if the mainstream media would do it, right?
Yeah.
And we can't forget as well that like literally the fucking Home Secretary, it is the Home Secretary, isn't it? Fucking Liz Truss, or is she foreign secretary?
Foreign secretary.
Home
But
is
as the foreign secretary,
Priti Patel.
right? So as foreign secretary, she literally stated on BBC that she would support the right of any British citizen to go over and fight
Yeah, yeah.
for Ukraine.
Trying to
And she
tell
was
people-
questioned.
Why did she say that?
Yeah,
Well,
that's
she was
the
actually
key thing,
questioned
yeah.
by the BBC fucking reporter, who was like, "What?" Like, because we've been punishing people who went over to fight in Syria, right?
Who he
This is
did
a good
that
thing.
Rightfully.
And this is actually a good thing, but like people who joined ISIS, people who joined the Kurds, people who went over to fight for any faction in Syria were liable for terrorism charges, I believe, in the UK upon return, and it caused a bit of controversy because people who were fighting for the quote-unquote good side, like the Kurds, the side that Britain was actually supporting, I know they're not the good side, I'm simply saying the side that Britain was supporting materially and financially in that conflict, over the Assad government and over ISIS, obviously who they were supporting secretly, but like with regards to actual support, we were supporting the Kurds, and then like when people went over to fight with the Kurds, we were then giving them terrorism charges and stating that they could be charged under the terrorism law, right? So it why is this a different situation? Why is it okay to go and fight for Ukraine in the same situation where you will be doing terrorist attacks against civilians? Because that's what the fucking Ukrainian government is demanding of their militias when they're, you know, launching attacks against the occupied territories. But when it's
You're cutting out there, Tom, a bit.
Having trouble hearing Tom.
Hello?
Tom is breaking up.
Yeah, you
Hello?
broke up a little bit. Sammy,
Can you repeat?
you've not said anything for a while. While Tom's connection's resetting, what do you think on this topic?
You mean about Julian Assange?
No. We've not even spoke about it. You're not even listening yet. You're playing chess. Human rights.
No, I wasn't. I know you're talking about the British
Mercenaries,
mercenaries,
huh?
but I remember the first question you asked was about Julian Assange.
No, we've not moved on to that yet. On this topic, what are your views?
Well, I
Sorry,
don't
just
think
before you go,
even
can
think about
you
it
hear me?
much.
Can you hear me?
Tom. Yeah,
Oh,
Tom,
you
you're
have to
back.
repeat
There you
what
go.
you say.
Let Sammy speak first, and we'll come back to you. Go on, Sammy.
Well, I was just gonna say, like, I don't really have much of an opinion on like the British mercenaries in Ukraine. However, I was just listening to you explain the situation, you and Tom, and well, one thing I did know prior is that I did expect that if anything happened to these sellouts, basically, or these mercenaries, that the British government wouldn't even lift a finger, just the same way the US isn't even lifting a finger for Juan Guaido at the moment. Because as soon as they have their clowns, or their clowns have done their role, or they messed up ever so slightly, then they just throw them onto the side, don't they?
Historically, and now.
Historically and now, yeah.
Just one sat in a jail in Hong Kong.
Yeah, exactly. So as soon as I heard about like British or American mercenaries going to Ukraine, and also when Liz Truss said, "Oh, we're supporting the rights of British citizens to go fight in Ukraine," I thought, if anything happens, they're not going to do anything about it.
Well, they will.
Which is so typical.
They'll virtue signal to the media, but they won't do anything.
Yeah.
Solid. I think.
Precisely.
I think that the nest will probably keep them in jail for a long time. I don't think they'll carry out the. No, I don't think they will.
Disagree.
They lose their
bargaining
power.
No, because they found 3 American mercenaries.
Yeah, but that's now just bargaining power against the US as well. So.
But the thing with the US mercenaries is, this is what I found really interesting, is like Joe Biden literally hasn't mentioned American mercenaries and doesn't give a shit. Like insofar as like it's news, right? It's news that the Americans have been captured, but no one in the American political sphere actually mentions them or gives a fuck. Whereas like in Britain, it's like Liz Truss is like frothing at the mouth. She's like, "Free our fucking Nazi mercenaries, get them out now," kind of thing. You know, I think even Boris Johnson's talked about getting the boys home and stuff like that. So like, Britain has to have this air of caring about their civilians, even though they don't, in a way that the Americans just never do.
Wait, but there's also something about Hunter that the Russians may have, so Joe Biden might want to like picking. I don't know.
How can there be anything worse about him? There's like pictures of him snorting cocaine.
There is something about him investing in that biomedical human experimentation laboratory.
Oh. Mad.
Yeah, that the U.S. just admitted that they had 16 of them in Ukraine. Peaceful laboratories.
Why did Joe Biden let his son go and do all this shit? Like, I mean, like, you know, I can understand. All right, you're the son of the president. Okay, go and have your little fucking sex trafficking business, and you're snorting cocaine off hookers' breasts,
son of the
fucking
vice
business, and all that.
At this point,
all that kind of stuff. That's fine. You know, that's
laboratory
standard.
part.
That's standard American fanfare stuff.
46.
But like,
It's
why are you
so
getting
funny
yourself
when the
involved
Scouser
in, like...
talks about these things in this way.
No, but why are you going to fucking, like, why are you getting involved in like grand geopolitical fucking American interests with regards to like fascist fucking chemical weapons plants and stuff? Like, stay out of that kind of stuff. Just keep your shit down to fucking, you know, being a sex addict or a cocaine addict, like normal American fucking proteges.
Sons of the elite.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
But imagine the shoe was on the other foot though, and like Hunter Biden was Xi Jinping's son or something like that, right? Or Putin's son, or something. It would be.
He has a daughter, 2 daughters.
Yeah, no, Esha, but I'm saying, imagine if a character like that was the actual son of the people that get smeared so much as being, you know, dictators and terrible people, right? If that was their son, the West would be running those stories all day, right? And using them as an excuse to go to war. We did it about Saddam.
Oh, those were lies, though.
Go on, Sammy.
I remember a few years ago, Assad's son failed some kind of maths test or something, and the media used this as some kind of smearing tool, whatever. Like, wow,
the Western media.
His son can fail in that test, it means he's not a dictator.
The WikiLeaks on Syria, because there was a Syria leaks, wasn't there, at the time of like the start of the quote-unquote revolution. There was a WikiLeaks. No, there was hold on, Esha. There was a WikiLeaks on Syria, and
not WikiLeaks, some other leak.
no, it was WikiLeaks, the Syria files.
Oh,
In those documents, there were like loads of Syrian government corruption that was like uncovered. You know, actual stuff that was going on. And there was like a certain bit about the Assad family in there that said something like, they got the emails between Assad and his wife, right? And in those emails, they were just like, they seem concerned about their lower staff. They don't seem to talk about much though, apart from just like the daily life. Hold on, Tom. The daily life of the leaders, meaning that they had like nothing on them, and these were just like, pardon me, a couple who worried about like their staff. But he's trying to paint him out as a dictator.
It made him look really good. I swear, I thought
Just made him
Assad
look good.
himself leaked it.
Exactly.
Yeah. It was like Assad talking about like how to make kebab. Like it was yes. It was the I thought that the CIA leaked it, but Assad could have leaked it himself.
I mean, they could have,
look.
but they could have. It could have been a CIA leak to WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks would leak anything, and they would just keep the source anonymous, wouldn't they? That was the thing. Tom, what were you gonna say?
I was going to say there was a fantastic one recently where it was talking about them Assad email leaks, and like
Assad
there was
listened to country music.
there was like a fantastic one where like it was clearly some like honeypot attempt where some woman had emailed Assad like trying to like sleep with him, and he'd like the email response from Assad was like
at Syria.com.
Yeah. Like, so someone had like tried to fucking honeypot him, and his response was like, "I have a wife," and that was it. That was That's just a good guy. Funny shit.
But yes, apparently Assad's son did fail a math exam once.
Gutted. I guess the US must invade. Sammy, what were you saying?
No, I was just saying how they were using this, how his son failed an exam to kind of smear him as kind of, just to paint him in a bad picture, really.
A bad dad, because his son had failed.
Yeah, I guess so.
It's mad.
Exam.
Literally got nothing on him.
When you're talking about
confirms
his
it for
son's
me.
math
We
exams.
should immediately launch airstrikes, like to liberate Assad's son from fucking
Math class.
How's that going to
I
help?
think the world needs to be liberated from maths exams.
What was that, Coco?
The world needs to be liberated from maths exams.
Well,
I disagree.
That's true.
I think being bad at math is a bourgeoisie affliction, and only like people inside of the imperial core have the luxury of being bad at math. So yeah, I think everyone needs to be good at math if you're a proletariat. Only
you see like
says
Chinese
more
fruit
math
sellers.
than-
Like you see
Coco
Chinese
says no.
fruit sellers here, and they're just like they can do better maths than anyone I've ever seen in my life.
Exactly.
Like, you'll-
Hence, it's a bourgeoisie affliction to be bad at math.
yeah, you get all your fruit that you want from this guy, and he's just like, 一块五到加2块到3块到4块到6块到7块到8块，就是24块. I mean that's probably wrong because I wasn't actually doing the maths, but like, they just instantly do the maths in their head. It's I mean that's like the the Chinese working class that have never gone to university, that've never done that kind of stuff. Like, it's just so much better than the average Westoid in every way.
Hence, being bad at math is counter-revolutionary, and
I've just put
bourgeoisie
a poll.
affliction.
I've just put a poll in the chat there, so if you're listening to it live, you can vote. Maths tests, ban them or have more. So
No, math, that's not what, yeah. Anyone who wants to ban them is a counter-revolutionary within the imperial core.
I've been outed here, boys. This is taking me one podcast. I've been outed as counter-revolutionary.
yeah.
You better,
Only half.
better go
You
into
made it
hiding.
halfway. Called out by Esha.
Now, yeah, being bad at math is not is only acceptable.
That's the Indian in you, Esha, right? You're Indian.
Exactly.
Exactly.
The proletariat, third world person knows that only first worlders can be bad at math, so hence it has to be a bourgeoisie affliction.
Get an Indian to do the maths for you, right?
Yes.
The Western way. Right.
Oh,
Yeah.
God.
So, what's happening with Julian Assange, right?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? We sort of knew it was coming. As soon as they took him from the assembly, you sort of knew he wasn't going to get anywhere with it.
So what happened today? Because hadn't his extradition already been like signed, and today it was just confirmed.
Yeah, so the way the process works is you have so many appeals, obviously through the court system, and the final one is obviously approved by the Home Sec. So it got up to her, and it was with her for a little while.
Which is Priti Patel, right? The woman.
Priti
who's-
Patel.
You're putting your life in fucking Priti Patel's hands.
Priti
Jesus
Patel's
Christ.
hands, who, bear in mind, has just been massively wounded following the Rwandan plane scandal.
Which, for
you know.
anybody who doesn't know what the Rwandan plane scandal is, the demonic British government was planning on sending refugees to Rwanda and just dumping them there. They'd signed some sort of like mutual business deal. It's like one of those cheesy pictures of Priti Patel meeting the Rwandan government, and you can just about see the bag of cash just hiding.
Well,
in the corner of the pic-
they literally admitted that they paid them, though, didn't they? Like, it wasn't even secret that like it was a heavily we'll give you fucking X billion pounds and you fucking take all of our refugees off us.
But I tell you how it gets worse, right? Is we are accepting some refugees from Rwanda as part of the deal.
and obviously this doesn't apply to Ukrainian refugees, of course.
No, of course not. Of course not. But essentially,
I thought never mind.
just to sort of close off Fran's explanation, in sort of the 11th hour, there was meant to be about 130 people on this plane to Rwanda, refugees, obviously. It got down to about 15, and then all of them got injunctions from the European Court of Human Rights. So the plane never took off, hence the current conversation in the United Kingdom being about our withdrawal from the European Court of Human Rights, so that the British government can go on to extradite as many refugees as it wants without having to worry about the pesky foreign judges and the European rights. And that took one British judge, as I was sort of alluding to earlier, to mention that, in theory it could have been a Russian judge ruling on the Rwandan case, and sort of, slipping some nice disgust at that.
But that's so funny to me that that Britain, claims to be this paragon of, as we were discussing earlier, we're the first country to pass modern slavery bills. We're so progressive. We're so obviously we know that that's not true, but that's the image that they want to. But that's the image they want to give off to the world, right? I know, Ash, you're preaching to the choir, but this is the image that they very much. I know, but this is the image that they very much want to give off to the world, and then they get ruled on that they are committing a human rights violation, and rather than saying, okay, sorry, we realize that was wrong, they're like, well, actually, we're gonna just withdraw from the organization that told us we're committing a human rights organization. How is that not the most outrageous, barefaced admission that you are a human rights violator state? Because it is that, isn't it, right?
Like you didn't already know.
Famine to me is a bigger admission.
Like you didn't
Of course.
Just on Alexander's point in the chat, they have got a couple of weeks to file it. They can appeal, unless there is an appeal. He has to be extradited in 28 days. His legal team's pretty sort of hot on it, so I'd imagine there would be an appeal coming at some point within the next month.
How many more appeals does he have?
Hold on, Tom. Do you know, in cases like this, will lawyers jump on this to be able to score a victory? Do you know what I mean?
It'll be the same legal. It'll be the same legal team that's been with him throughout, I'd imagine.
Okay.
He'll have one set of probably it's been with him since he went into the assembly. But no, in other words, because this isn't going to be a victory, he isn't going to win his appeal. It's as simple as that.
Right.
At least it will.
Yeah.
So anyway, we talk about that because this is all being carried out under the command of Priti Patel, right? Who is the same person who just signed Julian Assange's extradition today, right? I think the point before was that the courts had said that he could be extradited, right? But it was down to the the British Home Secretary obviously has final say, right? She could block it, just like Obama can release any prisoner when he was president, right?
She block it.
It's not just a power that Obama has that you can just release any prisoner, but the president can do that. This is the British alternative of that, right?
Kind of. So essentially, she didn't. So I can drop the link for anyone who's interested in actually reading it. But essentially, what happens is the court system in the United Kingdom is very sort of antiquated. You think of like the typical the very stereotypical British upper class. All you need polite and permission, all stuff like that, and that is the British legal system in a nutshell. Oh, I should be specific. It's the English and Welsh legal system. You've got to remember it is separate. So when we're talking about British court system, we are talking mostly about England and Wales. So basically, he has to get leave of permission. Is what it's called. So he has to get permission from the High Court to appeal the order against the Secretary of State. That has to be within 2 weeks of the extradition being ordered by.
So he can appeal again.
He has to get permission to appeal again. So basically, that will only be on a sort of a point of law of general public importance. Now he will get this appeal because it is a point of law that is of general public importance. But he won't. So in other words, he'll get the permission to have the appeal. I don't think he'd win the appeal. What you're referring to, Fran, with sort of comparing it to like the presidential pardon, it's not quite right because the presidential pardon is blanket. It's for any crime. This is very specific, set out in the Extradition Act of 2003, which basically says that the Home Secretary can have the final say on extradition. And what's notable is if you go and look at the 2003 Act, so it's the Extradition Act of 2003. It is prohibited by statute, so it's banned by statute law if the person could face the death penalty, unless the Secretary of State gets adequate written assurance, that's the wording, that death penalty will not be imposed.
The death penalty?
Well, this is the biggest thing is he's currently, I believe, facing 125 years in prison, so he is not facing on paper the death
US
penalty.
waived the death penalty then.
Yeah, and that is why she is granting extradition, essentially. So they have, as far as I'm aware, waived it in terms of assurances to our government, and that's why it's not been statute barred. So there are some countries. So, for example, if we take another country with a death penalty,
and of course, and of course, that the US could instantly just unwaiver that as soon as.
Of course, yeah, 100%.
Well, they could.
No.
What's the US? What's the
they
UK
can't.
gonna do?
They've never done that. They've had many cases where Canada has required them to waive the death penalty, and they have in each case.
Yes, of course, but they could do.
They have by precedent, but in theory, once he's on US soil, the assurances to foreign government are sort of null and void. Now, again, looking at precedent, they won't. They won't.
The US. What's the UK going to do, right? Hypothetically,
Well,
he lands in the US.
done that to Canada
doesn't matter
or
whether they've
Mexico.
never done it, but they can do it. That's the point.
Yeah. So Fran was asking sort of the hypothetical of, in theory, could the US turn around and put the death penalty?
Could.
In theory, yeah, they could, but they won't.
In theory.
Because they won't, because ultimately they still
maintain
have
that
to.
relationship, right? They want the UK to extradite people again, so they're not going to do it because the UK will just stop doing it then.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. It's like exactly,
You're
but in
the wheels,
theory,
aren't they, by letting it happen?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, obviously, in theory, yes, they could go back on their word and obviously put him to the sword, but as sort of Asher said, they won't. They've never done it before, and it's sort of not worth the risk in one sense, because they're the UK.
You put him in like a fucking.
Hold on. Basically, U.S. is the only country in this entire hemisphere that has the death penalty, and so they're not going to get anyone extradited from anywhere because every country
would just say no.
That people will probably run away to will say no. If they do that.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that sort of death penalty sort of provision in sort of the 2003 Act was mostly for it was in one aspect for like the United States, but it's mostly for other nations that still have the death penalty that the UK maybe wants to keep on good terms. So I know, like in theory, hypothetically, I know China has the death penalty, so they might seek written assurances from the Chinese government that they're not going to sort of execute someone that they've extradited. And that is, again, that's a sort of an example to sort of bring the conversation sort of full circle. In the Human Rights Act, basically, it implemented a provision that said that every single law that has to be passed in the United Kingdom now has to be quote unquote compliant with the Human Rights Act, with the European Convention on Human Rights. So obviously, in the 2003 Act, that was that part that was protecting the right to life. But there have been sort of some exceptions. So, famous the Communications Act breaches the ECHR, but it was passed anyway. But that's sort of an interesting sort of side piece to that. So to sort of turn around, he will be launching an appeal, Assange, but I don't think he'll be getting it approved in the slightest. So he will be going to America, where obviously he'll have a sham trial. And I think he's been charged with up to about 125. It was either 125 or 175
and then the
years in prison.
Is that they're probably in America? They have these while he's under jail, they can put him in solitary confinement, so they can just drive him to suicide or whatever. They don't even know.
Well, exactly.
I mean, we've literally seen the USA, they won't give the death penalty to someone, but then all of a sudden, fucking what's his name, Epstein just ends up committing suicide in a suicide-proof cell when all the fucking cameras go off. There's always the way that they could get Assange. Well, the thing is, Assange is right now, personally, he is no threat to the USA. It's more just a well, yeah, but I mean, his leaks did do damage to the US reputation, however poor it was already, to the extent that they're seeking this kind of revenge on him. And I think how I perceive it is although he's no longer a threat, the USA wants its revenge. And honestly, I think doing a full life sentence in a fucking American prison would be worse than the death penalty. Personally, for me, I'd rather, if you gave me a choice of the two, I'd rather just take the bullet, because what I've seen from American prisons, they're absolutely horrendous anyway. And then obviously, as Escher just says, they factor in things like the solitary confinement, things that they could subject them to, psychological torture, all that kind of stuff. But one interesting thing that I saw liberals talking about, right? Because this is kind of this isn't even just a left-wing issue. This Assange case,
not left-wing himself, really, is he?
He's of course, yeah. But there's plenty of people all across the political spectrum that disagree with Assange's imprisonment in the UK and in the USA. And I saw British liberals saying, so America wouldn't extradite Anne Secoulis, the woman that killed that British teenager, the wife of the diplomat. That was Anne Secoulis, wasn't it?
Yes, yeah, it was, yeah.
Yeah. So America wouldn't do the justice of giving us an actual murderer who killed a British teenager and then fled the country. But then we'll go and do America's bidding. And does that not show just how clearly
British bidding? WikiLeaks is and all, it doesn't care. It publishes anything it wants and everything.
Yeah, they post smears on China and stuff as well.
Yeah. They'll publish anything anyone gives them.
Sure. But what I'm getting at is does this not just show how clearly Britain is a client state of the USA now, whereby we won't even stand up for our own interests. Historically, Britain has, I know obviously there's always been intertwinement between the two empires, but Britain has always kind of had a vestige of independence from the USA. An air of independence. Sometimes we'll say, oh, fuck you, America, we're doing our own thing, even if it runs counter to American objectives. Not always, obviously, we'll go into Iraq for them and stuff like that. We'll sign on to any military engagement the USA wants us to. But there has been cases where Britain has not towed the party line on American foreign policy. But then when it comes to Assange, which would have been the easiest victory for Britain, on the world stage, they would have gotten praise for not extraditing Assange, and they would have had precedent to do it because of the case of America not extraditing Ansakoulis to Britain. But we didn't. Does that not just show how much of a client we are, an American client state we are now more so than ever? Like, it's crazy.
I wouldn't say. 100%. Hold on. I wouldn't say Britain are that much. I mean, I'd say it's a bit of give and take, isn't it? Definitely on terms of like extradition, it seems to be a one-way street. But I wouldn't give the British that much slack of being able to go, well, we're just under the thumb. They're willingly under the thumb, I think. Go on, Cucko.
Yeah. Sorry.
No, Tom, you finished this. Go on, reply to me.
No, I wouldn't disagree with that. I mean, obviously, it serves British interests as well to get rid of Julian Assange, because he is like the enemy of every state, basically, right? He's a nefarious actor to everyone. I think fucking Putin doesn't like him. I think Xi Jinping doesn't like him. Fucking Boris and Biden. No one likes Assange really, except for people like the people that read his leaks. But like that, the point being, like, it would have been such an easy geopolitical win for Britain, and showing Britain's actual independence from America if they'd have said, well, no. Or even if they'd have said, okay, well, we'll give you Assange, but we want Ansakoulis in return, right? Something as simple as that. Like, it would have put Britain in a better light with British people. But British people as a whole, no matter what side of the political spectrum they stand on, support Julian Assange, and like, this is just a massive... I don't know if there's anybody
who is pro Julian Assange extradition, right? There seems to be people who are against his extradition, and then people who just don't care. Like, the majority
pretty much,
don't care, like everything. You know, that's just humanity, right? But it's not like you're seeing a clash between two sides, is it? It's very strange.
But picking up on what Tom was saying, like, I think it's a fair point, and I thought this at the time. It's sort of on a point of legal principle. You very much could have just refused to comply with the Extradition Act when it comes to the United States until they decided to give it.
And what's the US going to do as well? What's the US going to do? Like, invade the UK? It's not, is it?
Well, exactly. But I mean, if you go all the way back to how the US will refuse to take part in the International Criminal Court and threaten to, invade the Netherlands if an American soldier ever stood trial in the ICC?
The Hague Act, or whatever it's called. Any US soldier if any state or anybody attempts to bring any US soldier to trial at the International Criminal Court, right? The US can legally, and this is legally. I mean, Tom, you asked a good question earlier about those mercenaries, because everything in the show is going to fit into that bracket. The US can, quote unquote, legally invade Netherlands. Well, how's that possible, right? How can they legally invade Netherlands? Well, they can't, can they? They can legally in the US's law book, right? In terms of that book, but that only applies to the land that the US controls. That's how, that's sovereign, right? So would they in that situation? You don't know, but they've got the quote unquote legal right, and they're definitely going to use it as like a cudgel, aren't they?
Yeah, 100%.
We're ready to go.
It's like, obviously back to what Tom was saying. I kind of agree to one aspect, and again what you were saying, Fran, about it sort of willingly under the thumb. Especially for the last sort of 7 years or so with Brexit, Britain's sort of trying to stand back up again and sort of beat its chest, just particularly sort of with Ukraine. And I thought that, the Julian Assange thing would be a perfect opportunity to sort of try and give the stick to America just a little bit. Not enough where they're jeopardizing the sort of the imperial court, but enough to
not be
stand up on their own two feet. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. Hold on, that's not said out of any sort of pride for Britain, but if like British conservatives, they are very much still like imperial minded, aren't they? And see that like the British Empire should still be number one, right? So they're the people who are in charge of Britain, and it is kind of, I get what you're saying, it is very strange to see that kind of mentality just lay down. I mean, Boris will go and stand again. Gone today to stand under Russian drone operators in Kiev. You're watching Russia like precision strike military depots in Kiev, and then Western leaders go to Kiev the week after and walk around. They must know that they can be watched. I mean, obviously, credit to Russia for not vaporizing them. Right?
But the thing with that is, the thing with that is, like, they go on so much about how evil Russia is, about how like Russia is an a rogue state, how it's an evil actor and all this. But then they trust Russia enough not to fucking assassinate them when they very easily could do. Like,
well, they know they're not
on
going
a daily
because
basis.
they've had decent. They do still have decent like diplomacy. It's like that scene in Doctor Strangelove, isn't it, where the president phones the Russian president and they have like a friendly chat because, you know, in reality they're both politicians. Their job's politics. Like, it's just like, you know, they're on friends terms as well as being the two leaders of these countries. So although, like, you know, the West knows that Russia can be let into the table, it's more so that the West doesn't want Russia to be at the table and they want to beat them back, right? So do you get what I mean? So they know that they have to create this like animosity between each other for the rest of the world to see, when they themselves know that it's, oh well, this is just our jobs, right? We're just at work, no hard feelings. We're just at work. That's the
and they also
attitude
know
sometimes.
that Russia gained very little from assassinating, you know, Western leaders. Like, what actually is there to gain?
Nothing. About where you would just escalate the situation, right?
But that's the thing, though, right? But this runs counter to the narrative that they feed us in the media. Like, that's what I'm getting at. Like, you know, if I was fucking Vladimir Putin, like, I wouldn't assassinate these people either, but like, I'd be thinking about it. I'd be sitting there in the command office, like, finger hovering over the kill button, you know.
If the US I mean, this is on the topic of Assange as well, because it's part of the leaks that he brought out against the Iraq files. Sammy, I don't know if you heard of this as well. But some of the stuff that was getting leaked was US like attacks on popular mobilization like groups, you know, people who were anti-occupational government and anti-US occupation, right? But not ISIS. Many factors at play in all these wars. Same in Afghanistan, right? You've got the Taliban, you've got Al Qaeda, you've got the US, you've got all the other little groups that then come and take part as well. So, I've gone off topic here because I've just switched to Iraq and forgot what Afghanistan. But anyway, yeah, the US was caught doing exactly that. So leaders of these groups would get killed in an airstrike that would murder 300 civilians in the process, and then a Western leader will go to Kiev, and obviously they're being watched. How can they not be watched, right? If they can hit Kiev with precision missile strikes, they're being watched, right? It's just a given.
I mean, it was broadcast on BBC, you know. It was just there.
Yeah,
you know,
but what I'm saying is Russia has eyes over all of Ukraine, right? So for any Western leader to go to Ukraine, you're basically going to stand underneath a Russian drone operator, right?
Yeah.
So, but the comparison again is the West. If that happened in Iraq, like it did with some of the anti-occupation forces, they just like murk the leader and 300 civilians in the process and try and cover it up. But obviously, Russia's not doing it. But Russia's the evil one. Right? I'm not.
Oh yeah. Oh well, for definite. Yeah, no, they are 100%. You know, definitely evil. You know?
that's the whole thing, though, isn't it? It's this kind of. I think I posted about it earlier on the Telegram. Like, it was actually from the Duran's live stream where they were talking about how Vladimir Putin was somehow both this ultimate evil who was like single-handedly responsible for like the American economic crash, the global food supply crisis, the global oil crisis, the global natural gas crisis, all this stuff. He single-handedly was able to overthrow the American democracy and implant Trump, who was a secret agent. He goes around the world assassinating all of his detractors with like fucking chemical weapons and biological agents, nuclear material, all this kind of stuff, right? These are all the things that Vladimir Putin is capable of. But then in the same breath, the same media will say like, Russia is losing in Ukraine, right? And like it is actually one of the Umberto Eco's 14 characteristics of fascism.
From an operation every week as well, doesn't he?
Yeah. But like, this is one of Umberto Eco's 14 characteristics of fascism, right? And he's a liberal, so I don't really agree with all of his points. But one of the points is the enemy of the fascist state must be simultaneously weak and strong at the same time, right? Now, is that not like the perfect definition of what Putin is described as? He's described as this ultimate evil. Same with Kim Jong-un, right? These people are
not just them. Same with like, you know, China, the Soviet Union, Cuba.
China is the victim of collapse on a daily basis. China's on the precipice of collapsing every 5 minutes, but also it's the greatest threat to the world. You know, Russia is the greatest evil in the world. It's capable of, you know, global espionage and destroying the global system every 5 minutes, but also it's the weakest army and it's losing in Ukraine. The DPRK is like, you know, it's capable of hacking the USA and launching nuclear missile strikes against the US mainland, but also it's so weak that it would crumble in 5 minutes if the South Koreans went across the border. It's hilarious, isn't it? This is the playbook they use for every single one of their enemies, no matter what the ideology is. Like, no matter what if you fall under the same with Assad, right? Assad is you know, so evil that he's capable of doing all these evil things, but also he needs to barrel bomb his citizens because I don't really know what the reason they give why Assad supposedly barrel bombs his civilians, but yeah, but that's the thing, isn't it? It's the same for every Western enemy leader, right? Is the same story. It's hilarious in a sycophantic way. Like, you've got to laugh.
Yeah. So
on that,
go on, Tom.
You know, you're talking about obviously the signs of fascism and how they have to taking their enemies as simultaneously powerful and weak. Have you ever read the Pentagon report that they spent thousands on by watching Putin do judo and coming to the conclusion that he was autistic?
No, but that's amazing. Please link that. Please link it.
Go on.
Yeah, it is genuinely out there. I'll find it now for you. But they genuinely did a whole report on watching Putin do judo, and were like, yes, this man is autistic because we can see that by the way he moves.
Right. And
epic.
And then what's the next? How much did that cost, and what's the next step?
Hang on, let me find it for you.
They had no next step.
The whole point is like, you know, aren't autistic people supposed to be like, you know, in the eyes of like the majority of kind of what's the word in?
But
like
it's not
the
a disadvantage,
leadership,
right? What's the point? That's what I'm asking. What's the point in that estimation? How did they get to that?
Fuck if I know.
Oh yeah, they also thought he had a stroke in utero.
Well, they've played that one a few times. He died from like an operation this week. Right?
He is like an ice skater with a club foot.
How many times has Kim murdered his wife, and then like the next week she's back, and then
how many times has Kim died? I mean, the whole joke about
then,
Juchi necromancy comes from how many times he's died, right?
And then his uncle died, and then his uncle comes back. You know?
Oh, his uncle didn't just die. He executed his uncle by either killing him with an artillery cannon because he fell asleep in the Politburo, or
something.
Yeah, or they fed him to dogs. I can't remember which. Maybe he did both. I don't know.
Do you know what? I realised all these little stories are like when you were at school. and there'd be like little urban folklore about things. Like remember that Frosties advert where that kid was singing about
it's gonna taste great,
and everybody used to say that he'd like killed himself and that, but like in reality he was just like, you know, an actor, and he had like an acting career out of it or something. But like everyone's got a different thing. Like so one of the stories, he's got like pencils shoved up his nose. One of them's like he killed himself. One of them's like he had to move like halfway across the world to get rid of the bullies or something. I don't know. They come up with but the stories are exactly the same, right? Kim dies and he comes back, and then there's no explanation. He's come back. I'll ignore that we reported it. I tried to look this up the other week because I'm old enough to remember that, like, when the DPRK was the victim of like here's satellite photos of the prison. And the BBC, etc., used to publish all these like satellite photos. You could zoom around and, you know, have a look at what was pretty much just probably an actual Korean prison, right? Nothing nefarious, just a prison. But all those articles have been scrubbed because obviously it didn't stick. So get rid of that one. Next, it's like that, isn't it? Like audition. Next, it fails, and then they bring out the next one. The reason they fail is because of like what you said, Tom, with the contradiction. Hong Kong was a good version of that because you had the Hong Kong protesters that had been taught by the Western NGOs to say that the Hong Kong police are really brutal, right? So they've been prepped with that story, and then the Hong Kong police just aren't that brutal.
Like the best one they could come up with for the Hong Kong protest was like one girl went blind in one eye because she got hit by a rubber bullet, but like she was like stood behind a fucking like a paper sign or something, and the rubber bullet wasn't even aimed at her, it had just penetrated, and it was a shame. And like, you know, it happens during any protest, right? But in the same week the French were suppressing the yellow vest protesters, right? And they shot someone in the head with a rubber bullet and killed her, I believe they killed her, or if they didn't kill her, they did severe brain damage or something along them lines. And this happened in the exact same week as this supposed brutality by the Hong Kong police, which was an accident. But the actual French police one, like, it was a targeted shooting of someone in the head with a rubber bullet, and it either killed her or, as I say, did like irreparable damage to her. And like, we never heard anything about the French one because obviously France is an ally of sorts, or it was. I think we were still in the EU at the time. And Hong Kong is this ultimate evil, and you know, every day you'd hear the news stories, wouldn't you, about how like, any day now there's going to be a new Tiananmen Square, they're going to send in the army's coming in, they're going to kill everyone.
That was brilliant when the PLA did come out, and they came out in like basketball uniform and just tidied up the streets for a bit and then jogged back to their little camp. You would see the rioters the police weren't biting in the way that they wanted the police to bite, right? And so they would go to like the PLA base and just hang around at the gate and scared to go any further.
That was the thing, because I think like even the Hong Kongers were like the rioters, I mean the black shirts in Hong Kong, were like kind of trying their best to instigate a massacre, but they didn't want it to happen because they were cowards at the same time.
What happened to them?
Like they didn't have the childing energy. Like no one was actually willing to go and do the thing that would spare her. Well, of course. No, but she was willing to sacrifice people. But even in Hong Kong, there was no one willing to make the first move. You know, no one was willing to fucking lynch the police officer. Well, true.
There was that guy that stabbed the policeman in the neck, right? And there was that old bloke who got a brick in the face. I think the protesters probably did more damage than the actual. Anyway, someone in the chat says Vladimir Putin has cancer. She has a brain aneurysm. Kim Jong-un is dead. But Joe Biden is healthy and fit enough to be US president. I mean, he is healthy and fit enough to be US president if you think about it. It doesn't take much mental capacity to read an auto cue once a day.
Well, he can't do that most times, can he?
I mean,
That's true. That's true.
It's It's mad. It's mad, isn't it, that the only country that's used nuclear weapons more than once on another country is like ran by a senile. Well, is it ran by a senile? Has a senile old man as its like front man?
Figurehead.
Mm-hmm. Anyway.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's change topic before we finish the show. Before we finish that topic, so we're gonna have to keep an eye on Assange, right? See what happens in his appeal. But you think that it's gonna be as fruitless as the rest of it, right?
Yeah, he'll go. I think
some time.
Yeah, he'll get the leave to appeal, unless the European Court decides to do something drastic. But they wouldn't be able to cover extradition, to be honest. He'll get the leave to appeal. He'll go back to the High Court, and he'll be turned down one more time. I expect he'll be in America by the end of the summer.
Oh,
That quick.
such a shame.
That quick? Is that what we're talking now? Unless he can get to another embassy, right? What's the likelihood?
Nah, he's in prison now.
It does depend. He won't be able to get to another embassy, will he? He's in prison, so unless he stages a prison break from
sort of bust out. Wow.
Yeah, unless he gets out from
dramatic,
almost secure prison.
Wouldn't
that
it?
would be insane.
If that just came on the news, I wonder who
That'd
would do that.
Putin would probably take him in, like just as a fuck you to the West.
Or Cuba.
Yeah, Cuba. I mean,
Cuba, a Cuban assault on the British Isles to liberate us. Be some sight, wouldn't it? Be some sight.
That's like
just fucking hundreds of ribs coming across the fucking Atlantic.
Wow.
Yeah, no, he'll get the leave
Godspeed.
to appeal, and then he'll obviously be chucked on the plane straight over to America.
Yeah, exactly.
Handed over to the federal marshals.
And then what?
And then
he'll go
then
to
he'll have his
US jail pending trial,
Yeah,
right? Which is
pending
probably
trial.
going to take years.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I don't know how long he'll have to wait for his trial here, to be fair, because there is still a huge backlog with the courts here. So
Is his trial? Is it linked to Chelsea Manning, etc.? Is it linked to that already? Like, is it ready to go? Are they just basically waiting to get the guy there to just?
Well, I think it's all ready, but he'll have to instruct representation in the US. So that'll take time. They'll have time then in the US to prepare a defense for his case. It'll probably be at least 6 months, I would imagine, to give him ample time to prepare.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you think of cases over here, basic cases take it, anywhere between a year and a half.
Yeah, it's not like an overnight thing. But what are the best and worst outcome? Well, the worst outcome, I guess, is that he spends his life in jail, right?
Yeah, and that's also probably the most likely outcome.
What's the best outcome? Best in inverted commas.
I mean, there's always the long shot that he gets away with it.
And is that the US does what it did to Chelsea Manning and sort of... I mean, what is the argument to say that they do the same and keep the guy in prison for 7 years
Chelsea,
or whatever?
With Chelsea Manning, it was interesting, wasn't it? Because she was in prison for a good couple of years, and then Obama just randomly decided to pardon her.
Yeah, and then ran for the Democrat Party for...
That's the thing.
election.
She got made into like an acceptable kind of. She was. That's that
But
thing, isn't it? Where
is she not the worst felon out of the two of them though, in terms of legality? Because
Yes,
Assange just received the material, right? She's the one who committed all those acts, right? He technically didn't do anything, right? Yeah, well, sure, but we're talking best scenario here, right? What's to say that the US acts in the same way that they acted? I mean, Obama did it for virtue signal points, right? Because it made him look good. What's to say that the US puts Assange through all that process, keeps him locked up for 10 years or whatever, and then does the same, right? One day, suddenly, the president has let him out to get a pat on his own back.
Yeah, I mean, it's entirely possible and even likely. You know, but it all depends because I guess the key difference is that Julian Assange went and hid in an embassy for a number of years and made life difficult. So they may want to make an example out of him.
Well, that's true because Chelsea Manning was Obama countered her sentence back to the arrest date or something, didn't he? And then let her out early or something like that, right?
But Snowden managed to get away and has still gotten away, and I think the kind of that has pissed the Yanks off a lot, in that they couldn't get to him, and because Assange did the same thing basically, only unsuccessfully. I think that's kind of
he
can't get
didn't
Snowden.
though, did he? Because Snowden did the same as Manning.
Snowden did the same as Manning.
Yeah.
No, but I mean, insofar as
Assange is just somebody who published the material.
I know. In terms of the legal aspect, that you're right, definitely. But what I mean is the act of hiding in the embassy and basically making the USA looking like a clown show. He's physically in the US's borders, but they can't get him, and that pisses them off, kind of thing. And I think that because Snowden got away and is safely in Russia, and Assange didn't manage to get away, they'll be like, well, we couldn't get Snowden, so we're going to make an example of Assange and
other potential as well.
Yeah, so no one gets this idea of hiding in an embassy again going forwards, kind of thing.
And Manning was arrested on the job, wasn't she?
Yeah. What you've also got to think about is
in Iraq, I think arrested while at work in Iraq and then taken to Kuwait. Was it
not Hawaii?
I think because she ended up in Kuwait for a short while. So
I'm
must
thinking
have been
Snowden.
In Iraq. She served in Iraq, right? And that's why she had access to all that data, and then was arrested because the data came out, and one of her superiors, she was already being watched because of her reasons, I believe. And one of her colleagues were like, "Oh, you have access to that video." You know what I mean? And then they just put two and two together in court. And then, so she was literally arrested at work, taken to Kuwait, and taken back to various US military jails, abused at various points,
tortured,
mentally, physically, made to sleep naked, all sorts. And then like you say, after was put on trial, found guilty, she got away. This is what I mean with earlier when we're talking about they're free to just throw away the death penalty if needs be. Manning was the same because aiding the enemy comes with a death penalty charge, right? In military
treason, isn't it?
Yeah, aiding the enemy. But they dropped that from her as well, I believe. And then,
but the USA likes to pride itself on being this, in their, I know they're not, but in the Constitution they've got this free speech condition, right? Where the First Amendment, isn't it, or Second Amendment? First Amendment. Yeah. So it's literally within in the UK Constitution, which we were discussing earlier, there is actually no provision for free speech, I believe. Am I correct in that?
Yes. So we call it free expression. So it's not an absolutist free speech. It comes with sort of a lot of asterisks.
Right, but the USA likes to pride itself on being this free speech country, and I know that's objectively false, based on what we've seen throughout history. But regardless of that, that is still the thing they like to tout themselves as, this free speech absolutist state, right? So the very fact that they would execute somebody for free speech is kind of massively counter to their own narrative and raises issues all across their political spectrum, because obviously the right wing is heavily into their free speech over there. The left wing also protects it. So it's kind of a bipartisan issue in the USA. So it's difficult for them to execute someone like Manning or even Assange based on what we would consider free speech. I don't personally agree with free speech. I don't think Nazis should have free speech, for example.
I think you're correct. I think you're correct, right? But what I think it is better is that it serves the US twofold because they get to put them in jail for a bit and make them go through all that shit and really like, you know, break them down or whatever they want to do, you know, and then 10 years later they can use them as a virtue signal to the next generation of liberals, can't they? Well, we're not that bad. We're not as bad as DPRK that locks up whole families. We let them out. We even let our, you know, the people that have done the most damage out, because you know, I think the US understands that it's not really relevant it's not really relevant now, is it, that, like, you know, the world knows what happened with those leaks and what the US was doing in Afghanistan, but it doesn't really matter because, you know, time just goes on. Not that it doesn't matter in terms of morals, but like, it's in the past, isn't it, right? So the US is free to like deal with that in any way it does. It doesn't have to. You're throwing Assange in jail almost for just because, right? Because you want to sign the bottom line of that like whole process and go, okay, well, we finished that one, you know, and we won in the end. But in reality, it doesn't really matter, does it? Because the US is going to exist either way, whether the war crimes got exposed or not, right? You get what I'm trying to say? So it seems to me that I think that they will take that route. I think he'll go away for a long time. I mean, obviously it's shit, right? But I don't think he's going to end up getting executed by the US. I think they will use him as they will do what you thought the British would do, right? That's what I think the US will do. Instead of the Brits letting him go, it'll be Americans, but it'll be in like 10 years, you know. Oh, look how good we are. Look how progressive we are compared to how we were 10 years ago. You know?
I think the thing as well is like the fact that his case is it's still ongoing, and it's been ongoing for so long. You know, he's had such a what do you call it? Like a story around him, like a mythology. You know, he managed to get away and hide in this embassy, and then he got arrested, and then they were talking about assassinating him, and then he managed to get into the British prison system, and then there's been all this kind of like back and forth saga about will they, won't they extradite him and all that. Once he is finally extradited, that's kind of like the end of his story, and he just won't be mentioned again then. Like he's still relevant now in modern parlance because the story is still ongoing, right? The mythology is still happening as we speak. But like, I think when the finality of the situation comes to pass and he is sent to America, it will just be the end of it. Then people will forget about him, and then as you say, Fran, give it like fucking
it's a
10 years,
victory.
they can release him. The next Democrat after fucking Trump wins in 2024, the next Democrat, Joe Biden's fucking reanimated zombie corpse or whoever wins, or Kamala Harris or whatever, will then fucking release him and be like, oh, look how good we are at free speech, we've released our ultimate enemy Julian Assange, and then that'll be probably what happens, something like that.
Well, why not?
I think it's going to go one of two ways. Either they are going to do it that way, or the deep state is going to want to make an absolute example out of Julian Assange, because, you know, it's well and good, or, you know, thinking that, yeah, Julian Assange didn't do as much as, say, Manning and Snowden, but ultimately, if they can discourage journalists from accepting leaks, they can sort of cut the problem off before it gets any further.
Sure.
So
That's
they can
true.
either...
But have they not already done that by, you know, the outlets like The Guardian got completely flipped, didn't they? You know, according to articles by like Declassified and stuff that show, like, you know, these... I mean, even the New York Times at the time even ran the leaks with like that angle that like, oh, we're doing this against, you know, we don't want to harm the US's war effort, right? So even the leaks were like sanitized by these liberal outlets that were already doing that anyway. So, you know, aren't they already doing that?
Yeah, and this is the thing, they could either keep doing it or try and do something a little bit more aggressive with it. I think they're more likely to have the trial in quiet, give him his lengthy sentence, and then release him in 10 years, and they'll say it's on compassionate grounds due to his mental health.
Yeah,
That's what I think will happen.
Exactly. It's a good term, that, isn't it? Compassionate grounds, because what they're saying is our compassion. It's us that's compassionate.
Yeah.
And they get
Yeah.
that victory, don't they? Because liberals will lap that up. Oh, Assange is out. You know, look how progressive our current president is. The first female president did this, right? You know,
Yeah.
that's the victory of them.
100%.
There'll be some virtues in
100%.
them like that, because that's how the imperial core has to do that, doesn't it? Because otherwise, you have to rely on like China bad stuff, and that sort of stuff is constantly getting less and less relevant as well, isn't it? So, I don't know. I hope the guy manages to get out, but we'll see, won't we? Right, before we finish up.
Speaking of China bad, should we just briefly discuss the military development from China this week? The big one.
Sure. I mean, I was going to say we can talk about anything. Sammy, are you still with us? I don't think he is. He's been very quiet. He did work late. It's all right. It's all right. I was just checking if he's there or not. You go on, Tom.
So, as you've probably heard, China's just launched their first ever domestically produced aircraft carrier that is not based on previous designs. So this is kind of like, it's quite huge in world military terms. The first aircraft carrier China owned was the Liaoning, which was bought from Ukraine, surprisingly, an ex-Soviet carrier. The story behind that's quite funny. Ukraine basically said, we're not selling you an active aircraft carrier. So China went through a holding company and said, oh, we want to buy it as a floating casino for Macau. Ukraine said, okay, if you're using it for a floating casino, that's fine. So they sold it to this holding company, and then it got sold straight back, well, got given to the People's Liberation Army, who refitted it into an active aircraft carrier. So that was the Liaoning. Then China used their experience with the Liaoning to build the Shandong, which is basically a larger version of the Liaoning, but under the same kind of parameters. So it's still kind of like a 1990s era aircraft carrier, still very outdated by modern standards, but it was their first kind of successful production of their own aircraft carrier. And then, as of yesterday, the Fujian was launched. Now, the Fujian is really interesting because it's not like anything that's been built before. It's almost equivalent to the brand new Gerald R. Ford class of American aircraft carriers. It can carry roughly the same amount of aircraft as the Gerald R. Ford class, but also it's got an electromagnetic catapult, right, which no other aircraft carrier in the world except for the Gerald R. Ford class has. So the British aircraft carriers, the most modern ones that we have now, the Queen Elizabeth class, do not have this electromagnetic catapult. The Russian carrier doesn't. French carriers don't. All of the existing American carriers, except for the most modern one, of which only one currently exists, do not have this catapult. So there's only two carriers in the world at the moment, the Gerald R. Ford, USS Gerald R. Ford, and the PLAN Fujian, which have this catapult. Now, that sounds quite boring. I'm talking a lot about catapults, but essentially how an aircraft carrier works for the layman is like the standard carrier will have like a literal catapult, right? So the plane goes onto this jettison. It launches it forward like a catapult, like a traditional catapult that you'd see in like the Middle Ages. It would be flung to the end of the aircraft, which would provide it. So flung to the end of the carrier, which would provide it enough speed to be able to take off. Now, the electromagnetic catapults don't use a kinetic launch system. They are electromagnetic, so they basically can fire much heavier planes. They can get much heavier and more powerful planes. They can get planes with much more armaments flying much easier. So this is why this carrier is quite important, because it can not only fly huge aircraft like China's aerial early warning and control aircraft, the AWACS systems, KJ600, but also like it can fly the new J-31 stealth fighter for the Chinese carriers, which have a large payload. they're kind of equivalent to the F-35s. But also it can kind of launch the J-15, which is the standard Chinese carrier fighter with a full load of armament and full load of fuel, which gives the Chinese carrier force a significant boost in range, power projection, and self-defense, being able to kind of launch.
What are they going to use the carrier for?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it? Right now, we've seen Chinese carriers. There was a People's Liberation Army white paper a couple of years ago, which discussed the carrier doctrine for the People's Liberation Army and how to use carriers. And obviously, China isn't an imperial power, so it doesn't use its carriers as like the USA does or Britain does. It doesn't send them abroad to intimidate smaller countries and use gunboat diplomacy. The use of these carriers. Yeah. So the use of these carriers is very much for domestic defense. So China has 3 seas, right, surrounding it. Obviously, it's the Pacific Ocean, but it's subdivided into 3 seas. So it's the South China Sea, the one you always hear about in the news, the East China Sea, which is the sea which it shares with Japan, the Korean Peninsula, that kind of area, the Russians as well with their Kuril Islands. It's kind of shared between those 4 countries, 5 countries if you count Korea as 2. And you've also got the Yellow Sea. Now, because China's got such a huge amount of sea to protect, especially because obviously Americans have talked about how important it is to close the Straits of Malacca in the event of a war with China, to kind of strangle them of trade, all this kind of stuff. People were wondering why. We had people commenting on the Telegram asking why the Chinese don't just use standard airfields. Basically, why waste money on aircraft carriers when you're not going to be using them imperialistically, because that's how aircraft carriers have always been used, imperialistically. But basically the issue here is, in order for planes to be near enough to the front line to be able to actively partake in combat, they would need to be within range of missile strikes, right? Standard airfields. So like you can have airfields dotted all across the Chinese coast, which would be able to provide a sort of similar range of power projection as an aircraft carrier would. But in that event, the airfields are known. The American satellites know where they are, and they would be the first things targeted in a war with China. They would be shut down as soon as possible, in order to kind of prevent them from being used against the USA in like an encirclement war. So you've also got the South China Sea artificial islands, which is also a big controversy, which also have airfields on them, but again they would also be shut down by American missile strikes on the first day of a war, generally speaking. Now, an aircraft carrier obviously is a boat, should go without saying, and boats can move, again, should go without saying. So you can have a rough idea of where an aircraft carrier is, but 5 minutes later it could be 20 kilometers away or something like that. It's much harder to neutralize an aircraft carrier. You look at the Pacific War between the USA and Japan, and that's the only time in history where carrier versus carrier battles ever happened, right? And it was always kind of the scariest battles for the USA was when they were facing up against Japanese carriers, because when you have a carrier versus a carrier, it's a completely different battle dynamic than having your carrier defended by a load of destroyers versus a standard navy. Because standard navy, China's navy, is very powerful, but without the carriers, it doesn't have the ability to project power in such a way. It doesn't have the ability to send out AWACS aircraft to discover the locations of enemy aircraft. It doesn't have the ability to launch significant suppression strikes. I mean, you think one destroyer can launch, let's say, 30 missiles, give an example, right? Before it needs to return to port and be refitted. So one Chinese destroyer might be able to launch a decent amount of missile strikes, but then it's basically out of action. It has to return to port, get refueled, sort itself out, etc. Whereas a Chinese carrier can launch 40 to 70 warplanes. Each warplane can carry 10 missiles. So that's a strike capacity of over 10 times that of a destroyer, right? So one carrier is essentially worth 10 destroyers in a conflict against any other naval power that's seeking to attack China. And you look at Chinese history has obviously been, all the wars that they've lost in history have always been through, well, except for the ground wars against Mongols and stuff like that. They've always and against Japan, which also had the ground war from the Korean Peninsula. But every other war in history that China has lost, disregarding those two prior given examples, have been through naval losses. The USA and the UK using gunboat diplomacy during the Opium Wars, sailing gunboats up the Yellow River, up the Yangtze River, launching attacks on Chinese cities from the river themselves. China's got a long memory, and when it comes to like learning from history, they're some of the best. So that's why they focus so heavily on the Navy now. And in order to match a competitor like the USA, something that will be sending multiple aircraft carriers into the Chinese territorial waters in the event of a war. That's what they did with Iraq. That's what they did with, pretty much every conflict that has been not a landlocked conflict. Obviously, Afghanistan didn't have carriers. Afghanistan's landlocked, but countries like Vietnam, the Indochina wars against Laos, Cambodia, all these countries, the war against Afghanistan, the war against Iraq, every kind of war that's been propagated against kind of countries in South America has always involved an overwhelming carrier force launching the strikes against those countries, right? The USA has always been able to have this kind of what's the terminology, superiority in naval forces. So they'll go in, they'll destroy the local navy, the defensive navy, and then once that's been destroyed, the carrier is basically free to just sit off the coast of that country, safe away from missile strikes and other kind of issues, and just launch strikes against that country, right? Now, China's a completely different beast in that game, because China has the huge missile force, the People's Liberation Rocket Force, which is basically specifically designed to destroy enemy naval formations. But also China has been working on carriers so that they can kind of match the USA at their own game. You can't neutralize a navy that has carriers as easily as you can neutralize a navy that doesn't have carriers, right? No matter what other forces that navy has. China can have 300 destroyers, right? But it won't matter if the USA sends fucking 6 carriers and their respective battle groups into the waters. So China's doctrine, when they talk about carrier defense, is very true. Like, they use the carriers defensively. The carriers very rarely leave the territorial waters of China. Mm-hmm. And in the event of a large-scale conflict between the USA and its allies and China, you would have the issue whereby most likely the only 2 states that would probably join the USA would be Australia and Japan, who are members of the Quad and AUKUS alliance, respectively. Maybe the UK as well, but obviously the UK is on the other side of the world, so it's not as relevant. You'd sink one of the British carriers and the British would go home.
Yeah.
Well,
to get there and maintain their ships. What
exactly.
port of Britain got on that side of the world nowadays? I mean, Diego Garcia?
Yeah, exactly. They haven't got the capacity. I mean, Australia has the capacity to launch strikes against China because obviously they're geographically located. Japan absolutely would. They're still vehemently anti-Chinese fascist state that never really got dismantled after World War II. It just kind of changed its branding to a liberal democracy. It isn't one. So, Japan would very much be involved. So in order for China to defend itself against not only an overwhelming American force that would be coming from through the Pacific, which would be enough of an issue on its own, you've also got Japan, which would likely be involved, and you've also got Australia. So you could, without a carrier, China doesn't have the long-range strike capabilities to hit Australia, It does have the capacity to hit Japan, but Japan is a different issue. But Australia, you could kind of force them out of the war by doing some limited airstrikes against military infrastructure in Australia by sending a carrier battle group down there to dissuade them. So that gets Australia out of the way. Japan, you could defeat Japan conventionally without having to, no invasion required, but you'd be able to, with China's air force alone, based inland, they'd be able to probably do significant damage to the Japanese infrastructure, to them not too much of a threat. But the idea of using carriers is, one, to protect itself from American carriers, and two, to be able to give itself the option to project that power should it be required during a combat situation. And as I was saying earlier with the Straits of Malacca, if the USA were to close the Straits of Malacca and basically shutter the Chinese economy for 2 weeks, that would cause significant economic damage to China. Now, if China didn't have the carriers and they only had the airfields, let's say the airfields on the artificial islands and the airfield in Hainan, which would be the only ones capable of having the range to even launch strikes against a blockade of the Malacca Strait, that this would be a very short-term thing, because they would be the first airfields that the USA would neutralize, to basically make that impossible. But if the USA doesn't know where the carrier is, and the carrier can keep moving around, launching sorties against them, it becomes a lot less tenable to maintain this blockade of the Malacca Strait when you've got a constant harassment of Chinese carriers.
And why shouldn't China be able to extend its defense beyond its land border, when historically, the West used to sail gunboats right up Chinese rivers and stuff, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Right up into mainland as a show of force, and just massacre a village for whatever, blockade a place. People said in the chat, weren't they? You said earlier, they were saying, what about airfields? Well, you can't maneuver an airfield into the Strait of Malacca, can you? And
exactly.
The US out of Asia, right? You can't do it. So,
I mean, we've seen with the Ukraine war as well, you can kind of shut down an airfield for weeks at a time just by launching 2 or 3 small missile strikes against the fucking runway, right? So the runway becomes cratered, and that makes the runway unusable until it's repaired, right? So if the USA was consistently launching airstrikes against Chinese airfields, they would be unrepairable and planes wouldn't be able to fly from them, right? So, and that's a lot easier for a static target that you know where it is.
Well, it adds a level of unpredictability that you can control with, the use of a carrier, right? So, whether they're being bombarded every week, just the fact that it might happen is you're at a disadvantage, aren't you?
And the very fact that people look at carriers through the imperialist lens because historically they've always been used in an imperialist way, right? Britain used them to launch airstrikes against Iraq. America used them to launch airstrikes against Iraq. They've always been used as kind of the next big gunboat in gunboat diplomacy. But
Navy blockades have been a thing for hundreds of years as well, right? Even if the use of a carrier is imperialistic, the fact that it can be used for blockading is not imperialistic.
Well,
it's a military tactic.
Exactly, it's a military tactic.
It has no political allegiance. Any political ideology can use that.
The USSR at its height in the just prior to the collapse in the 1990s had about 6 carriers, right? And the USSR had a lot less territorial waters to defend than China does, right? Mm-hmm. Russia today has 1 carrier, the what's it called? The Admiral. Oh shit!
I can't help you here.
Too early. Anyway, Russia has one aircraft carrier. It's currently out of service. That's why it's not been present in the Ukraine conflict. But during the Soviet times, they had carriers, using them for the Chinese kind of doctrine of territorial water defense. Now, they could never match the amount of carriers that the Western alliances had, that NATO had, the USA, the UK, France. These countries all had a significant carrier force, and the Soviet carriers would have not been able to, but they had the same issue. They had a huge landmass like China, not obviously China wasn't as big as the USSR, but they still had this huge landmass to defend, and static airfields can only go so far. You can only use them in a limited way. Like if they get shut down, then that airfield is out of service. Whereas you got carriers, you can kind of project power from all around your country in every kind of waterway as well. So it's an interesting topic. I mean, the USSR didn't use carriers imperialistically, but because they didn't, not many people even know the USSR had carriers, right? So when people see China building carriers, they're like, oh, well, are they going to use them in the same way as the USA does? Are they going to use them in the same way as the UK or France does? I think it's more akin to saying they're going to use them in the same way as the USSR did, which is, as we said, territorial defense, maintaining a doctrine of not just having static airfields and basically providing you the capacity to strike from unexpected angles. And also...
As we know, the Chinese are very unpredictable in the way that the West discovered that they were using the sea to hide their submarines, right?
That is true, yeah. I mean, no one expected that.
It's anybody's game, really, to what these carriers could be used for. They could look like military carriers, but actually they're like civilian, and it's a cruise experience. Who knows? Could all be a ruse.
It could be. I mean, one interesting thing about this new carrier, though,
other than what we've just...
At what cost, of course.
Are a ruse, but at what cost?
But one interesting thing that we've touched on the Telegram but haven't mentioned here is the name of the carrier as well. So, like, Chinese carriers are named after seaside provinces. Liaoning is in the north, borders the DPRK. You've got Shandong, which is kind of like between Liaoning and Shanghai, so it's kind of like in the middle of the East China Sea. And then you've got Fujian, which is right on the border of Taiwan Island, right? Now...
Taiwan Island is part of Fujian province.
It is. Yes, it is. Correct. Taiwan is not...
It is.
Well, yeah. I'm being kind to the liberals by giving them that explanation.
Why? Why? When have they ever
it's easier. It's easier to understand for them. So, like, this is an interesting name because they could have chosen any number of provinces. Like, if you look at Chinese netizens for the past, 6 years, they predicted all different ones. Guangxi, Zhejiang, Guangdong. Even some people said maybe Shanghai or Jilin would be the names of these carrier, the next carrier. These are all potential options. But then no one really predicted Fujian. But Fujian is kind of like a really interesting name because it's, as you say, it's the province of which Taiwan Island is a part of. So, like, is this a message? Maybe. Some of the
I don't think the problem is, right, I know people say, is it a message? I personally, there's probably, I mean, if it is a message, it comes with good intent, right? And if it is, I mean, I don't think it probably is a message because China just don't roll like that, right? They're not going to piss people off for no reason. Like, it could be a message of, like, solidarity, if anything. Do you know what I mean? If it is a message, it comes from the positive angle rather than some sort of aggressive message to the island. But I don't even think it's that. I think it's probably just some military protocol means, like how hurricanes have to have a certain. It's probably some military protocol that's, and it's just a coincidence that it happens to be good timing, right? I don't think they make such a showbiz style move on the world stage, right? It doesn't fit with, like, the concept of faith, right? But it could be, as all you say, it very much could be. But I personally, I don't think Chinese are that crass. That's the kind of move America does when it's naming its genocide weapons after Native Americans, right? I don't think China rolls like that. That's the imperialist way. to name your.
It's certainly interesting to think about though, like at a time of political crisis like we're in right now, when more and more people are calling for more and more Chinese people, are calling for the liberation of Taiwan.
If it has been done in that sort of manner, then probably shouldn't have been, right? Maybe they should be a bit more. But I think that we're living in a time where China's always like preached the importance of like talking about problems rather than doing that American grandstanding shit, right? So it would be a big mistake if it was that. If it's come out of good intentions, then perhaps maybe just let it happen. Get the boat out there. Don't make a meal
what is sort of undeniable though is if a conflict does break out over Taiwan Island, this aircraft carrier will be playing a very important role in the pacification.
I don't think that situation will ever come to a point where it's like the Ukrainian military action is needed, ever to the point where like aircraft carriers are involved as well. I think it'll.
It very much
it's
depends.
It's going to be used more for just having and for if they needed to blockade the Malacca Strait. I don't think it's ever going to be used in that way. But
it very much depends on Taiwan themselves.
The very fact that they have it is also a deterrent. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So you don't have to be aggressive with it. You just have to have it.
Sure. And at the moment, now China has 3 carriers, and they have, as I say, 3 seas. So each carrier is attached to the division of one of the respective seas.
The Atlantic Fleet, the Pacific Fleet. Yeah.
Yeah, but they don't stay in the Atlantic and the Pacific. They go and harass other nations. Whereas like the Chinese ones will very much be attached to the local fleets of those areas. China has like the 3 fleets: the South, the East, and the West fleets. And now that each of those fleets has its own carrier, it definitely makes the prospect of a war against China more difficult, because no matter which sea you assault, there is going to be a significant response to that. It's an interesting development.
To counter that argument that like why can't they just do it from airfields? I mean, like there are islands that are part of China that are not connected to the mainland. So how else do you defend those? You're going to build a military base on every single one of them. Well, then that's just going to you're going to end up with even worse propaganda about you if you start doing that, right?
Yeah, of course.
And even more so accused of acting like NATO and militarizing everything. It's better to have like one carrier that can move than having to build airfields everywhere to make sure your support network is there, right? I think that's the difference, isn't it, between the Chinese military and the US military, and that like the US military is like such a logistical project that like almost no military can become like that, because it would require that China would have to have outposts everywhere to be able to operate in that manner anyway, because it would have to have a reason for running that carrier between those 2 places constantly. It'd have to be like sending food down its supply line to a military base on the tip of the. Do you like the way that the US military operates? Like 99% of the time, it's not in actual. 99% of it is not in actual combat at the very moment it's existing. Right? They're just doing their day-to-day work. You've got to have McDonald's on base, and it's got to be supplied. And do you know what I mean? That's the real, and it exists because it exists, right? It's that capitalist thing. It exists because it exists. And now, because we've got this logistics set up, a company doesn't want to lose that catering contract to supply a US military base in whatever. Well, there's CEOs walking around in the US going, oh, well, what's your business? Well, we're a catering company, and he prides himself on the fact that he supplies 500 US military bases around the world, right? And he's lobbying his congressman to make sure that contract stays in place. just the guy who sells like burgers to military. That's how the US military operates. So half of the existence of the US military right now is to just exist, because they know that they won't even go and dip their toe into conflicts, having to send mercenaries to the Ukraine still, right? Because they don't dare send in the real boys, because it would just grind them to a halt, wouldn't it? And it's better to just keep the US military going, because all that money that's going round, the laundry bill, the company that makes the just them alone, it's worth millions. So just keep it going. So that's the difference between these two countries, that China will only use these carriers for when they need to be used. It's not going to be just sailing around those seas all the time needlessly like American carriers do. This is why America has to project itself half the time. It's not even so much to bully these countries as much as bullying these countries is a good enough reason to sign the dotted line to go and make it happen. Do you get what I'm saying?
Well, like one evident point of the difference in carrier doctrine is the fact that the USA exclusively uses nuclear powered carriers, right? And the reason for this isn't that that's a superior form of propulsion. The reason for that is that essentially the carriers are around the world so often, traveling the seas so often, that they would be using billions of tons of oil just to run them if they were standard conventional powered carriers. Now all of China's carriers are oil powered. That goes to show that their purpose isn't long range. Like you physically can't, like you couldn't even send them to the UK. Like they would run out of fuel by the time they got to the UK. You'd have to send a significant supply chain of fucking
which they don't have, because they don't have all these bases that they can stop at on the way, right, and refuel.
Exactly, yeah. So like the point is, they stay near to China's waters and they get refueled when needed in China's waters, and they're a consistent deterrent, and should the need arise for them to be used, they will be used, as you say. But like, hopefully it doesn't come to that, because if China's carriers are being used, that means we're in World War III, generally speaking.
I think a lot of it is that is the difference, isn't it, between like a Chinese troop and an American troop can have the exact same kit, but it's cost 5 times more to kit the American one out because of all the contractors that are in the way and are sponging off that, because that's the military industrial complex, isn't it? That's literally what it is. It exists to exist. And the opposite with China is they just their military exists to defend China, and that's it. So as long as China's not really being under threat, which it isn't, because the US doesn't dare, right? That's the bottom line. Those carriers can just sit ready to go, right?
I mean, the USA doesn't dare to.
Exactly.
The USA doesn't dare to the extent that, like, when Trump was leaving office and he wanted to do this extreme show of force to the Chinese, where he was going to send all of these carriers into the South China Sea and launch like air sorties into Chinese airspace, and that the government, the general in charge of the US military phone called the Chinese general and was like, "This is what's happening. We don't agree with it. We don't want it to happen. We're going to try and stop it through any means necessary." And they were trying to do him for treason initially because he went against the fucking the commander-in-chief and the commander-in-chief's wishes, right? Who was Donald Trump. And like, eventually nothing came of that, because he potentially prevented World War III. Because if China sees fucking 6 carriers launching fucking all of their aircraft into their airspace, what do you think is going to be China's response? They're not going to think, "Oh, this is just a peaceful move."
I know. I mean, you're correct. And this idea, I mean, you see it, don't you? A lot of people say, "Well, why is China so soft?" and stuff like that, right? You see people say that. Well, they're not soft, are they? Because if they were soft, the US would have, like the US. When was that US spy plane shot down over the Soviet Union? It was a US CIA spy plane. It's like in the 70s or something, and they've not
80s, I think.
They've not flown. Anyway, they've not flown a US airplane. I mean, I know a lot of it is to do with the fact that they don't have to anymore, because satellites in space can just fly over the top of China, right? But they've still not physically flown a plane over China since that one got shot down over the USSR. And that's not because China's a pushover, right? China and the USSR, it was the USSR that shot it down. But they've not flown over China as well. for that same reason. Because
and
when
China's
push
like
comes
more...
to shove, when push actually comes to shove, they know that they're not actually a pushover. But when push isn't at shove, they're not going to bite back.
That's the thing. Like, recently we've seen kind of Chinese jets intercepting Australian planes, intercepting Canadian planes over the
But they're
DPRK.
going to, right? Because you become close to that's what's going to happen, right?
And even the UK, like when the UK was planning on sailing its aircraft carrier through the Taiwan Strait, and China said that they couldn't guarantee the safety of the aircraft carrier if it transited Chinese territorial waters. So what did the UK do? The UK did not transit the Taiwan Strait because they took that threat very seriously. And like that's the thing, like you can threaten the client states, even nuclear armed ones like the UK. You can threaten them to a significant degree because even the USA isn't going to start World War III over a sunk British carrier or a downed Canadian
care about
plane.
3,000 just like regular squaddies dying, do they?
Of course not.
Couple of like semi high level staff, I guess, the captain, etc. Nobody that important, really, though, is it? Captain of an aircraft carrier is not important to the existence of US capitalism, is it?
Maybe an American carrier. Maybe an American carrier.
Yeah, but even still, they just train another one, right? It's still replaceable.
But I mean, like we saw with Pearl Harbor, like an attack on American carriers different, which is why China doesn't threaten American carriers.
Yeah, they definitely sacrifice the puppets first, right?
Yeah, but British, Canadian, Australian, and that's what you see with China. Like China is not afraid to very much threaten those forces with complete destruction.
How up the chain? That's the question that these countries are asking the West, isn't it? How up the chain do you want to get messed up? Like we'll sink a British carrier, or you destroy Ukraine. It's all the same. You got to learn that you're just like a puppet to like Jeff Bezos, so you can knock about in space, right? Anyway. I've ended the pot. Coco, are you still with us, right?
I am, yeah. It's been very fascinating. I have no knowledge on the military, but it's been very interesting to just sort of sit back and listen. I've quite enjoyed it, actually.
We're going to end the show there because it's like 2 hours 20. It's getting late.
I've got to go to work shortly.
Right, the poll that we ran earlier. Maths tests, have more or ban them. 81% said have more. I think that people were like voting bias. You really want to have more
because Esh is going to execute you if
exactly.
If you vote the wrong way.
I mean, I kind of like agree with we should have put a third option in, just keep them at the level. I think that's all right at the level that we're at now.
I have to sit my maths GCSE 3 times, and I passed it on the second time, and I started to sit it a third time.
Why?
Because my school was fucking idiot. Pretty much. I got a C on my second attempt, and no, you have to resit it in case you get a B. So I just didn't do the test.
Did you get a better result, or did you not know?
Nope. I just didn't. Basically, I asked them. I was like,
answers, right?
I was like, look, I'm not going to get anything higher than a C. Can I not just drop maths now? I've passed it, and they're like, no, you still have to do it. So I resat the GCSE a third time and just sat there for the whole exam and just didn't do it.
Wow.
So I know I'd already passed it.
Here's another dystopian British fact before the end of the show. The Conservative government in the UK recently said that they want to ban people from going to university who don't pass the exam that you just mentioned, which for anybody who's not British is the exam that you take at 16 when you leave middle school, high school, secondary school. The government said if you don't pass that test first time, you can't go to uni, which is dystopian, right?
That would mind only be for England.
Yeah, well, there you go.
Yeah,
that's why you have a lawyer, just to come in.
Just move to Wales, boys, and you'll be fine.
There you go.
The only time that sentence has ever been said.
Yeah, it's a bit late for me. Right,
it is a bit late for you.
Scroll up this chat and let me see if we've got anything. Right, okay, we've got Theo pretending with a silly name, pretending to be a mercenary, saying he's in
What's
prison.
Theo's name?
He named himself after one of the mercenaries, Andy Hyun. He said he was in Siberia. Of course, Every week, Theo changes his name to something stupid in chat. He said he smuggled. He said he's got a phone in his rectum.
That's
please
good.
contact the State Department. That's okay. We'll do that for you, Theo. What else we got? People were saying hurry up, right? Hurry up, Tom.
Sammy's not here to echo them thoughts, so that's good.
Somebody said, I wish it would rain where I live. Well, here's to you. I hope it rains for you wherever you live.
Yeah, British people just don't understand that because we experience it too much anyway.
Tony says America is still trying to utilize the American project. I mean, I don't think it's trying to utilize it. It's just trying to
preserve it.
Not preserve it. I think they know that it's fucked. I think that since 2008, the Western elite have just they're just looting the West basically, right? All assets gone. Clear out as many assets as you can. Clear out all that public, that's what austerity was about. Closing down all that public spending and transferring it into Ferraris and super yachts, etc. So I don't think they're trying to maintain the American project. I think they're just trying to convert the American project into super yachts. So when the inevitable does happen, they can sail it off into the sea. And my evidence for this is at the start of the COVID pandemic, the Financial Times ran an article on the top 10 super yachts to survive a pandemic. So there you go.
I remember that, yeah.
Yeah. China can just relabel everything made in Xinjiang. Well, of course, yeah. The trick, isn't it? You just stick a new label on. Alexandros says, for decades you've been hearing how corrupt Greece, Africa, China, Asian countries are. But he's discovered there is no more corrupt nation than Anglo-imperialist. I mean, I guess that's the British banking system by design, isn't it? That's the British way, innit?
Not wrong though.
No, 100%.
Alexandros says Escher's right, and then Tian says, no, Escher is left. She's a socialist. No, Tian, he meant she's correct. About I've said that one about Vladimir Putin having cancer. Yeah, of course. Just wait till next week and he'll have died his 6th death. None of the writers willing to die for the cause yet. It's about...
Vladimir Putin's a cat at this point, isn't he? 9 lives.
It's about who is the
I don't think he's died as many times as Kim Jong-un. Kim Jong-un dies way more often.
Yeah.
It's about who is the target of intimidation equal journalist. True. Hooray for the Fujian, yes, of course. Ukraine could use their old aircraft carrier right about now. Well, tough.
No, it was useless. It was useless anyway. That's why they sold it to China.
There you go, tough luck.
Also, it's a good thing they didn't still keep it because China wouldn't have an aircraft carrier fleet, and also the Russians would have just sank it. So, yeah.
True. Right. If you've made it this far, good for you. And your reward for making it this far is being told to push like on this video, which I probably should have said throughout, but I always forget. I never do any of the promotion. Sometimes I get to the end of the show and I'm like, oh shit, I just ended the show before doing any of the plugging of the stuff. So please like this video. It's much appreciated. If you like it, YouTube does this magic thing where it recommends us to other sort of people. So it does more than anything else. You smash like. So if you've made it far, smash like. What else do I need to do? Right, Sammy's asleep. Vito's just listening. Vito, you joined in too late. The show's finished. Right, we'll chat to you after we've finished. You'll have to join in next week.
Yeah, all right.
Right, what do I need to plug? Don't forget, we've got merchandise that you can get. You can drop us a line in the Telegram discussion if you want a link to that. Anything you buy on there helps us pay for our website funding and pay for the streaming service and all that rubbish. If you're not into that, we've got Patreon. cheap. £3, £8, £20 if you're like rich. That's for like the rich people. High level Wu Mao.
That's for our Engels supporters.
Only join that if you're rich. Right? Yeah, exactly.
If you're bourgeois but you want to see the revolution because you've got a conscience, give us £20.
You don't get anything for being a Patreon. I mean, you get a bit of merch sent from Patreon that they like make for you, but you literally don't get anything. And you get the warm feeling of supporting us. The reason for that is because we really don't want to like paywall off stuff. So we thought, well, what's the point? It seems a bit weird to paywall off your stuff when you want people to view. So anyway, you're basically just helping us, which is a big thanks. And as we grow, our content gets better and we can do more things and we can, I don't know, go and make videos here, there and everywhere. So get on our Patreon, join. You know what it's like. I mean, you probably don't know what it's like being like a small-time media agency, but you know what it's like. We've got no Rupert Murdoch or anyone like that, so be Rupert Murdoch and chuck us £3 a month.
Don't insult the listeners like that.
True.
Don't call them Rupert Murdoch.
Okay. You can support us there anyway. You're under no obligation to, but please do or don't. You can also join our YouTube membership. In the bottom there's a big button there that says membership, which I have to help Esha set up later. You can join there as well. And that's it. Thanks for joining us.
Wait, when is Esha's pod going to start?
I'm not sure. It took a break because of Esha being sick, but we'll get that back on Thursdays, I'm pretty sure. She was on the show earlier on. Anyway, thanks for joining us, Cucko. Anything you want to say before the end of the show?
No, just thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Same. Welcome back.
Yeah, I speak for everyone, I believe, when I say you're always welcome. Very interesting insights.
Thank you very much.
And I apologise for those who just listen to us for the Sammy's like rich. What's the name of the
radio
accent?
voice?
Yeah, but what's received pronunciation, right?
Yeah.
Sammy's smooth as butter English accent that he learned, right, through learning English. I guess he's tired from work this week. But he'll be back next show and we'll catch up on the Middle East. We didn't have a chance this week because we were talking about everything else. And anyway, it's been a long time since we had a guest, so that took priority. Thanks for listening. You guys in Discord, just keep quiet for a little bit while this music plays us out, and we'll see you next week. Thanks. Don't forget to press like.
Press like.
See you guys later.
Oh, you're back. You woke up.
He's still here.
Wow.
Yeah, I was just in the bathroom.
For 2 hours.
What a revelation.
Right, that's the end of the show. I've already turned the music up, so people might not even be able to hear this, but we'll see you later.